Aerial Globetrotting by Captain Lee Wade, Member, United States Air Service, and Round-the-World Flyer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Shortly after the World War was over, many aviators turned their thoughts towards the practical use of aircraft, and many of them were in the United States Army Air Service. Believing it possible to circumnavigate the globe by an air route, these men began studying the problem, gathering all data, maps, and information they could secure to await the opportune time to prove to the world that such a feat was possible. The preliminary work. The result was that in 1923, a committee was appointed to select a route in an airplane with a performance and strength to withstand the hard usage it would be exposed to. This being accomplished, the personnel to make the flight was selected, and permission was granted by the War Department in December 1923 for the demonstration. Before we start the trip, let us find out about its organization, or the advanced preparations. The route was selected and divided into 6 parts or divisions. An experienced flying officer was put in charge of each to select the landing places, distribute the supplies, arrange for an interpreter if necessary, billeting, etc. These men are mentioned particularly because of their part in the success of the flight, and the desire of the members of the flight to have everybody know of our appreciation for their work, even though they have not been mentioned publicly. We had new engines, spare parts, and tools distributed so well over our route that we could make any repairs or adjustments necessary. All boxes were packed the same, whether in Alaska, India, or Greenland. We could find anything in the dark if necessary. The wood used in crating the supplies was of spruce, the principal wood used in wooden airplane construction, so that when we needed repairs to wooden parts, all we had to do was to take a piece from one of the crates. When the preliminary work was well underway, the personnel selected to do the flying was ordered to Langley Field for a brief course to familiarize ourselves with the type of plane to be used, meteorology, and navigation. Then to Santa Monica, California, to supervise the final construction of the planes to be used. The start-off. Now you may ride in the planes with us on a trip around the world. On March 17, 1924, we left Clover Field, Santa Monica, for Seattle, Washington. This part of the trip was to fully test out our planes in order to assure ourselves that nothing had been overlooked. The planes were flown over land as land planes. At Sandpoint Flying Field, Seattle, the wheels were taken off and pontoons put on to fly to Calcutta, India as seaplanes. In addition, we checked over our craft very carefully and arranged all the equipment to be carried. Our personal luggage did not exceed 15 pounds per person. On April 6th, we departed for Prince Rupert, British Columbia, following the inland passages most of the way. Only a short distance out, we came into low clouds, thence to fog, snow, rain, and frequently strong winds. On arrival at Prince Rupert, it was snowing heavily, and Major Martin damaged his plane on landing. Necessary repairs were made while waiting for the weather to clear. Leaving here, we entered into the hardest part of our journey, because of the meteorological conditions to be encountered. The weather was colder also, which made our work on the plains more difficult. Experiences encountered. At Sitka, Alaska, a storm came in on the open side of the harbor, which lasted for 2 days. The first day, 3 of the planes dragged anchor and were in danger of colliding before we could reach them. We worked from noon until late in the evening before they were made fast to adequate anchors. The second day, one of the planes broke loose from its mooring. Luckily, one member of the flight was aboard who saved the day for all of us. The others were rushing about trying to secure boats to go to the rescue, or were wading out in the water to try and hold the plane from being dashed to pieces on the rocks, for each swell was bringing it nearer and nearer to danger. Just as it was on the crest of a swell, ready to hit the rocks on the next, he managed to get the engine started and pulled the plane out of danger. The next day we passed by the glacial region, but were denied the beautiful scenery by a blinding blizzard. It was just like flying at night. We broke formation, every plane for itself. Fortunately, however, it ended just south of the entrance to the harbor at Cordova. Had the shoreline not been straight, we would have piled up on the rocks or against any projection or island as we were following the shoreline very closely. It was a great relief to arrive at Seward in Resurrection Bay. It was on our departure from Seward, shortly after passing Kodiak Island, that Major Martin had his second mishap, being forced down near the Indian village of Kanatak on the mainland. The rest of the flight rushed with engines wide open to Chignik Bay to radio for help. He was picked up the following morning by a Navy destroyer, and a new engine was ordered from Dutch Harbor. While the Major was awaiting his new engine, we flew on to Dutch Harbor because of the danger the planes were exposed to by probable storms at Chignik Bay. On attempting to rejoin the flight, Major Martin crashed into the side of a mountain, completely demolishing his plane, but fortunately not injuring either himself or Sergeant Harvey, his assistant and mechanician. After struggling over the mountains, facing snow blindness, living on meager emergency rations and wild game for 10 days, they arrived at Port Mahler on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. Here a boat picked them up, and they returned to the States. During this interval of nearly 2 weeks, we beached our planes to permit the pontoons to dry out, and made any necessary repairs and adjustments to our engines and planes. Then we received orders from Washington to proceed with Lieutenant Lowell Smith in command of the flight. The Aleutian Islands. Through the Aleutian Islands we had many things to worry us, such as sudden changes in weather, usually from bad to worse, and peculiar winds called by the natives woollywaws. From a perfect calm, a woolly would sweep down, often sweeping everything in front of it. The islands are sparsely inhabited, in most cases of volcanic origin, and without any trees. Flying along 400 or 500 miles, far from civilization, without seeing a human being, only occasionally a few birds, a seal, or whales, makes one lonely. Now and then we would close in our formation for companionship, sometimes with the wingtips almost touching. I can remember as if only yesterday the whole group flying along, Lieutenant Smith leading with the Chicago, Lieutenant Leslie P. Arnold in the rear cockpit, the New Orleans on the Chicago's left, commanded by Lieutenant Eric Nelson, and smiling Jack Harding, giving the rest of us all of his smiles. Henry H. Ogden of Mississippi with me, wishing for the warmth of our sunny South. We conversed by hand signals, which we called the Rabbi Code. Many times when we prepared to leave on a leg of our journey, a stiff breeze would be blowing, necessitating one member of each crew lying flat on the pontoon to free us from the mooring. In doing so, we would get the spray from waves breaking on the pontoons. Then we would hop in and fly several hundred miles, our flying garments freezing with a coat of ice, which served to keep the heat in next our bodies. Living accommodations. Our living accommodations in many instances were of considerable contrast to those afforded by our American homes or hotels. We quartered ourselves in traders' stores, salmon cannery bunkhouses, or on boats with bunks just wide enough so that we had to sleep in one position, and which were not long enough to stretch out in. Now it seems like a hard life, but at the time, it all was as comfortable as one could wish for. We enjoyed all of it, and many amusing incidents happened. In one place, a fisherman, Jack Toner, had a houseboat which was a savior to us. Working in the open and becoming cold, we would call on him to get warm. When we departed, he asked us to write our names on his front door, which he carefully varnished over to preserve. Later, on his return from a fishing trip, he found that someone had stolen his front door for a souvenir. At one place, living in a bunkhouse with some fishermen, was a man with a long beard who was heralded as a bear hunter of merit. One's hair would stand on end to listen to him relate one experience after another. On one occasion, while on the beach without any weapons of defense, a huge Kodiak bear surprised him. Dashing madly down the beach, not knowing where or how he was going to escape, a large tree loomed in view. This tree had but one limb, which was 20 feet from the ground. Just as he neared the tree and the bear was ready to strike him down, he gave one tremendous leap. All excited, one member inquired, "Did you make it?" The old man replied in a nonchalant manner, "Missed it on the way up, but caught it on the way down." In the attic of a trader's store, living on everything that ever grew in a tin can, the chief of the Aleutian tribe kept some chickens. One of our members, with an ingenious mind, fixed the engine of his motorboat, the only one on the island. Having bargained with him for 2 chickens for making the necessary repairs, we enjoyed a delicious dinner cooked by ourselves. At another island we found a population of 26, all the men being absent on Fox Islands, with the exception of one Mike, their chief. Mike was very ambitious, and many times brought us fish, which we certainly enjoyed. Continuing the flight across the Pacific. We had a great problem to complete our flight from Attu Island across the Pacific. The weather never seemed to clear on both ends, that is, at Shimshu of the Kurile Group, Japanese territory, and Attu Island. Finally, we selected a day, but very shortly on our way we encountered a terrific storm. In attempting to detour around it, we used up our fuel and were forced to take refuge in Soviet territory, on Bering Island of the Komandorsky Islands. Foreseeing such an event, we had sent a boat of the Bureau of Fisheries ahead, taking position just offshore. When they saw us coming in, they dashed in and dropped moorings to which we made fast overnight. We received a call from the Soviet Governor-General of the islands on board the boat. Our relations were most amiable, but he regretted he could not invite us ashore. Leaving early the next morning, we completed our Pacific flight upon arrival in Japanese territory. Passing along the Kamchatka Peninsula, we encountered a very bad storm which lasted for 2 days. After leaving our planes to go aboard the U.S. destroyer Ford, which with 2 Japanese destroyers was waiting for us with supplies, we were unable to get near our craft until the following afternoon after the storm calmed down. Then we found the moorings had chafed through, and only an emergency rope was holding the planes to the moorings. By 2 a.m, we had refilled and were on our way to Yatorfu Island. Such a journey! Ducking from one island to another in fog most of the journey. The only relief was in seeing a few birds taking to the air or sea lions rolling off the jagged rocks into the water as we passed an island. It seemed like heaven to land at Lake Hirakapu on Yatorfu Island and find green grass, trees, and a large crowd of Japanese in their highly colored costumes. Among them was a group of school children who had hiked overland for 3 successive days to be there on our arrival. In Japan. We arrived at Lake Kasumigaru, just outside of Tokyo, 10 days after the Japanese Exclusion Act was passed at home. We were 31 days behind schedule and had lots of work to do on our planes, such as changing engines, pontoons, etc. We found the Japanese had planned a 2 weeks welcome for us. Ambassador Woods arranged a condensed schedule, so we left our work and went on a 2-day reception, and as warm and sincere a reception as anyone could hope for. Our only complaint was that there were so many meals in one day and that we were not able to eat all the delicious food. They extended every means possible to make our journey successful and enjoyable all through Japan. When we arrived at Kogoshima, the last stop in Japanese territory, late one afternoon we received a surprise and thrill. It seemed as though all of Japan was gathered on the beach to welcome us at sunset, and a band from our Navy played our national anthem, while about 15,000 school children sang in our own language. Traveling through China. Our next flight was across the Yellow Sea to Shanghai. It was the first perfect flying day since we started. We were greeted by a great mass of people and were given a magnificent reception in the evening. Then and there we decided that we must have relays for receptions. We had only our heavy uniforms and we were in the tropics. So afterwards we took turns in borrowing a light suit from someone aboard a boat and going to the receptions. The method used in propelling boats worried us. In sculling a boat by a long oar around our pontoons, the sides of which were made of a thin veneer, we feared a puncture and delay. As it was, we had difficulty enough arising from the water with heavy loads. Therefore, all through the tropics, we sent a boat on ahead with fuel aboard so we could land alongside or near it to take on the needed supplies. Leaving Shanghai, we followed the coastline to Amoy and on to Hong Kong. It was amusing to see the native fishing boats away out to sea, propelled only by manpower. Sometimes we came so near them that they scrambled all over the boats in fright. From Hong Kong to Hoi Fong, French Indochina, we passed over a group of islands that rival, if not surpass, our 1,000 islands in beauty. Some were mere rocks of varied colors, while others were covered with a jungle forest. We were pleased to have clear weather, for a fog or storm undoubtedly would have meant disaster, as the islands were so close together and numerous. On the next leg of our journey, one of the planes was forced down in a lagoon near the shore just east of Hue. The others landed. A new engine was necessary, so on we went to Touraine to order a new one from Saigon. While the new engine was en route, the disabled plane was towed up the river to Hue by native sampans, a sub-chief in each beating a tom-tom for cadence while their families and hundreds of natives trailed behind in boats. The new engine was trucked over a jungle trail at night to Touraine, was in the plane running in just 70 hours from the forced landing and on its way to Touraine to join the other two planes. The rapidity with which the repairs were made is explanatory of the work of the organization which planned our trip. Over the Malay Peninsula. Thence on to Saigon and to Siam, landing in the river at Bangkok. Thinking we were going to be with them for some time, the natives were surprised when informed we were stopping only for 1 day. However, they wanted to pay a proper tribute, and on the eve before our departure, invited us to a beheading of 2 prisoners. We certainly appreciated that hospitality. Our next flight took us directly over the Malay Peninsula to Burma. It was all very wild country, parts of which were inhabited by an ancient race of pygmies who still hunt with blowpipe and poisoned dart. On arrival at Burma, we found a storm from the Bay of Bengal had blown in, and clouds covered the mountain tops. We had a great time picking our way through. One plane was caught in a down current of air and barely escaped crashing in the jungle. It rained until we got to Rangoon, where we remained several days because of repairs to one of the planes, damaged by a native junk boat during the night. We flew through rain most of the remainder of the way to Calcutta via Akyab and Chittagong. At Calcutta, we changed engines and put wheels on in place of pontoons to fly overland to England. As a rainy season was due, we shipped our engines by rail to Karachi and worked night and day in order to depart as soon as possible. We took off from Maidan Park in the center of the city on July 1st. The journey across India. Our journey across India took us to Allahabad, past the beautiful city of Delhi onto Ambala, thence across the Sindh Desert, where we encountered a sandstorm for nearly 5 hours before our arrival at Multan. We were coated inside and out with sand. The heat was terrific. We were told it was 128 degrees on our arrival, which we had no cause to doubt. July 4th, en route to Karachi, the New Orleans had engine trouble 85 miles out due to a valve breaking. Lieutenant Nelson demonstrated his skill as he nursed it on into the airdrome. Here we put in our new engines and left India behind as we carried on along the Persian Gulf, at times passing over saw-toothed mountains which were so barren that I doubt if even cactus could grow. We stopped at Chabar, Bandar Abbas, Bushehr, thence over Basra and on to Baghdad. We were so anxious to leave the tropics and get home that even though we were near some of the wonders of the world, we did not deviate from our course, only stopping overnight at the Royal Flying Corps Airdrome near Baghdad, and thence on to Aleppo, Syria. In Constantinople. Our next flight was exciting, as we took on sufficient fuel to fly direct to Constantinople. With this heavy load, we were forced to wind our way through the Taurus mountain following a trail. Often we were completely surrounded by mountain peaks, and the passages so narrow that we were forced to go through single file. Over the high plateau, passing extinct volcanic craters, past Konya, and suddenly a beautiful city, Constantinople, came in view with the blue Bosphorus, its great wall, and many mosques. Across Europe to Paris. After 2 nights and 1 day, we departed for Bucharest, Romania, where we spent 1 night, and continued across Europe over the Franco-Romanian air route, passing Belgrade, on north to Budapest for lunch, and to Vienna. We stayed overnight and then hurried on to Paris via Strasbourg. As we were 31 days behind schedule at Tokyo, we decided to work extra hard and to make up the lost time so we could take a one-day holiday in Paris. We arrived on the 14th day of July, having picked up 17 days. Our holiday consisted of placing a wreath upon the unknown soldier's grave, a luncheon, a reception at the Hôtel de Ville, and by the President at his home, followed by a dinner at the Allies Club. On our first eve, there being nothing official planned, a group entertained us at the Folies Bergère. Upon arrival, and being comfortably seated, we all went to sleep, which resulted in comments by the papers next day that if such would not keep us awake, what would? The Atlantic Flight. July 16th found us on our way to Croydon, England, thence to Brough on the Humber on the 17th. Here we had to prepare for the Atlantic flight, putting pontoons on in place of wheels, new engines, and whatever other work was necessary. We had ample time, as our supplies had not been fully distributed across the Atlantic. Our first flight, then, was to Scapa Flow, where we came in contact with our Navy again, which was to escort us across and render invaluable assistance. On the first attempt to reach Iceland, we encountered fog, and in attempting to go over it, we were forced to break formation. The New Orleans was hit by the propeller wash of one of the other planes and sent down in a tailspin, but recovered control just over the water and continued on. The Chicago and Boston returned to Kirkwall to give out a message of the approximate location of the New Orleans. After many hours of suspense, we received a message of its safe arrival at Angamastalik, Iceland. The next day, halfway to the Faroe Islands, my plane, the Boston, was forced down due to engine failure. We signaled to the crew of the Chicago not to land, but to send assistance. They continued on and dropped a message to the USS Bellingsby. This news was radioed to the other boats, which came to my rescue. Nearly 5 hours after landing on the sea, we were taken in tow by an English trawler. The sea was getting heavier as we rode over the swells. It nearly pulled our plane apart. So it was a relief when the Billingsby relieved the trawler and towed us a brief time, when they turned us over to the light cruiser Richmond, on which we hoped to store the plane. However, in the rough sea it was impossible, especially after the boom dropped, damaging the plane and making it necessary to try to tow it to shore in the Faroes. In this attempt, the Boston was lost, sinking the next morning. In the meantime, the Chicago and New Orleans took off for Reykjavik on the west coast of Iceland. There they prepared for the crossing to Greenland. On account of delay, we all became familiar with the city, which was a surprise to us all, having a population of over 22,000, paved streets, electric lights, everything modern, even to taxicabs. A jump of 850 miles. A naval aviator, Commander Layton, and myself flew in and looked over the harbor at Angmastalik, Greenland, and after considerable thought it was decided to fly direct to Frederiksdal, a distance of 850 miles. It was on this flight that many exciting things happened. As they neared Greenland, a dense fog was encountered. Signor Locantello, the Italian aviator, started with them. When he came into the fog, he turned back out of it and landed at sea. He was rescued 5 days later by the USS Richmond. Fog and icebergs. When the others met the fog, they realized that the sea was too rough for them to land, and that they did not have sufficient fuel to return to Iceland, so went on. They remained low over the water, and about 80 miles out encountered floe ice, then icebergs, with which they played tag. Flying side by side, swerving from one side to another to miss an iceberg, now and then jumping over them, one came in view too suddenly to turn. This one was so huge that one plane went one way and the other in the opposite direction. Lieutenant Nelson in the New Orleans made a circle to permit Lieutenant Smith and the Chicago to go on and prevent a collision. Traveling at about 90 miles per hour and the visibility about 300 feet, they kept on keen edge every moment. As they neared and rounded Cape Farewell, they came out of the fog only to find another bank at Frederiksdal. Locating the harbor by mountain formations, they found a rift in the fog, Nelson arriving 35 minutes after Smith. That evening was celebrated aboard a Danish revenue cutter. On to Iviktoot and across the Newfoundland. down the coast to Picton, Nova Scotia, where Ogden and I rejoined them with the Boston II. Thence down the Maine coast, where we were worn out dodging fishing boats, small islands, and buoys in the worst fog we had found anywhere. We finally took refuge at Mere Point, Casco Bay. Arrival at Boston. The next day we arrived at Boston Airport. During our trip, we were totally ignorant of the enthusiasm here in the States, but readily realized it upon finding a huge crowd there to greet us, in addition to the Army and Navy officials. Leaving our pontoons for wheels, we flew over land to the end of the trip. Everywhere we found the same enthusiasm. New York, Washington, D.C., where President Coolidge waited several hours with his entire cabinet in a drizzling rain, Dayton, Ohio, Chicago, and all, on every stop to Seattle. We found it necessary to post policemen outside our doors to prevent souvenir hunters from stealing our clothes. As we were pushed through crowds, people reached over, putting their fingers lightly on us and shouting, "Ah, I touched one!" The end of the journey. Receptions everywhere, we answered questions, it seemed, by the millions. Another surprise awaited us at the end, a monument erected in our honor. We were 175 days en route, making a total of 75 flights on 64 days of flying. Our total flying time was 375 hours. Our demonstration already has realized a benefit, in my belief, as it has caused many new air routes to be opened and put to use, principally abroad, however. It is quite a satisfaction to repeat the words of an address of welcome given to us on the completion. Quote, "In the future, many flags will be represented as airplanes fly around the world, but only one nation can claim the honor of having her flag carried around the globe by air first, and that is the United States of America." End quote. End of Aerial Globetrotting by Captain Lee Wade. Read by Verla Viera.
Selections of Biblical Things Not Generally Known by Robert Tuck. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Julie Ann Thompson. Selections of Biblical Things Not Generally Known, Section 60. The Tomb of Joshua. Joshua 24, verse 30. Concerning this tomb, Lieutenant Condor, who is connected with the Palestine Exploration Fund, says, "This is certainly the most striking monument in the country and strongly recommends itself to the mind as an authentic site. That it is the sepulchre of a man of distinction is manifest from the great number of lamp niches which cover the walls of the porch. They are over 200, arranged in vertical rows. The tomb is a square chamber with 5 excavations on 3 of its sides, the central one forming a passage leading into a second chamber beyond. Here is a single cavity with a niche for a lamp, and here there is good reason to believe is the resting place of the warrior chief of Israel." Section 61. Calumnies against the early Christians. Acts 28, verse 22. Christianity had enemies on all sides. It offended men by presenting a higher standard of purity than their own. The secrecy attending some portions of the Christian worship aroused suspicions. Other societies, heretical or fantastic, which were popularly identified with it, brought the discredit of their practices upon the Christian church. And we know with what virulence a certain party among the Jews attacked the Christian minister and the Christian system. Paul himself had bitterly suffered from their misrepresentations and violence. It is, however, instructive to notice with some precision what the charges were that were brought against the Christians. The agape and the more sacred supper furnished material for some of the more horrible charges. It was said that when they met, an infant was brought in covered with flour and then stabbed to death by a new convert, who was thus initiated in the mysteries. The others then ate the flesh and licked up the blood. This was a sacrifice by which they were bound together. Another charge was that the members of a Christian church met at night, and after a certain time the lights were put out, and dreadful scenes of immorality ensued. Their holding aloof from all temples and altars brought on them the charge of atheism, and it was actually declared that they worshipped their god under the mysterious form of a man with an ass's head. There was an idea prevalent concerning them that they were worshippers of the sun, which seems to have arisen from the fact that they met on the day which was more and more generally known as Dies Solis, and from their speaking of Christ as the true light, and of themselves as the children of light. Over and above all specific charges, there was the dislike which men felt to a society so utterly unlike their own. They were guilty of treason because they would not sacrifice for the emperors, and looked for the advent of another kingdom. They were ignorant, rude, and uncultivated, and yet they set themselves up above the wisest sages. They led men to a dark fatalism by ascribing to God all their power to act. They showed a defiant obstinacy in their resistance, even to death, to the commands of civil magistrates. These were the chief of the calumnies with which the early Christian apologists found it necessary to deal during the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Christian era. Section 62. Rahab supposed to have been an innkeeper. Joshua 2, verse 1. Some commentators, following Josephus and the Chaldean interpreters, have endeavored to make Rahab only a keeper of a house of entertainment for travelers, translating thus, the house of a woman an innkeeper. But in the face of the parallel passages, for example, Leviticus 21, verse 7, Jeremiah 5, verse 7, this rendering cannot be maintained, and it is a gloss in striking contrast with the simple straightforwardness of the writer of this book of Joshua, and inconsistent with the apostolic phraseology. Hebrews 11:31, James chapter 2, verse 25. Rahab had hitherto been probably but a common type of heathen morality, but she was faithful to the dawning convictions of a nobler creed, and hence is commended by Christ's apostles for that which was meritorious in her conduct. Section 63. Beggars at gates. Acts chapter 3, verse 2. The stationing of beggars, especially maimed beggars, at the gate of the temple was evidently suggested by the persuasion that the feelings of those who were proceeding to, or had been engaged in, an act of solemn worship would be more inclined to charity and benevolence than at ordinary times. It is in the same calculation that at the present day the gates of the great continental churches, as well as the approaches to Mohammedan mosques, are thronged with beggars at the hours of prayers. We know also that the Pharisees and others in those days bestowed much alms in the most public places, that their ostentatious charity might be seen of men, and the perception of this weakness in a class of people so wealthy had, doubtless, considerable influence in causing the beggars of Jerusalem to resort in large numbers to places so public, and through which the Pharisees were so continually passing, as the gates of the temple, these people being more constant than others in their attendance at the sacred courts. End of selections of Biblical Things Not Generally Known.
I Will Fight No More Forever, a speech by Chief Joseph, from Chief Joseph, the Nez Perce, by Edmund Stephen Meany, 1901. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tell General Howard I know his heart. What he told me before, I have in my heart. I am tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. Tuhohosote is dead. The old men are all dead. It is the young men who say yes or no. He who led on the young men is dead. It is cold, and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are, perhaps freezing to death. I want to have time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. Hear me, my chiefs. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. End of I Will Fight No More Forever, a speech by Chief Joseph from Chief Joseph, the Nez Perce, by Edmund Stephen Meany, read by T.Y.Lee.
Do It Now by William Walker Atkinson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. If you have anything to do, do it. If you have any tasks to perform today, do it now. If the matter cannot possibly be performed today, stop bothering about it and get to work doing the things of today. But don't get into that miserable habit of putting off things until later in the day or later in the week. Do them now. The old proverb, procrastination is the thief of time, is true, but it does not go far enough. Procrastination is not only the thief of time, but the thief of energy, the thief of efficiency, the thief of success. We have had much to say about living in the now, about not dwelling in the past or fretting about the future. And all this is true, and I will probably say it over and over again during the year, because I believe in it, and I wish you to get acquainted with the idea. But living in the now does not merely mean the thinking of the thoughts of today, the carrying of the burdens of today, the meeting of the problems of today. It also means the doing of the work of today. To attempt to carry last year's burdens or next week's burdens today is folly of the worst kind, as you well know. But it is equally foolish to put up today's work until tomorrow. It is not treating tomorrow right, not giving it a chance. The self of tomorrow is not exactly the self of today. That is, it has grown a little, and it's the self of today plus the added experience of the day. And it is just as selfish for the self of today to attempt to throw his burdens upon the self of tomorrow as it will be for you to attempt to throw your burdens upon your brother or sister. It is not only selfish, but it is hurtful to you. It impedes your growth. Today's work is set before you because of the lesson it contains. And if you refuse to accept your lesson, you are the loser. You cannot get away from the task. It will be placed before you again and again until it is performed. And you might as well do it at once and get your lesson at the proper time and not be compelled like the schoolboy to catch up in his work. By putting off things until tomorrow, you're simply heaping up troubles for yourself tomorrow, as tomorrow's own work will have to be done as well as your leftover tasks, and the chances are that neither of them will be done properly. There's no sense whatever in this habit of procrastinating. It is folly of the worst kind, and not only in the immediate effect is procrastination hurtful to one. One of the worst features of the case is the demoralizing effect he has upon the whole mental attitude of the man. He cultivates laziness, indecision, shiftlessness, slackness, and many other undesirable habits of thought and action. It manifests itself in numberless ways in the character of the man who has allowed himself to be tangled in it. It impairs his efficiency, affects his value. Then again, you're really unfair to yourself if you get in the way of putting off things. You never have any time to yourself if you have a number of old matters demanding your attention. The man who procrastinates is never able to spare time for mental improvement because he always has some old loose ends to wind up, some old tangle to straighten out, and he loses all idea of the value of time, of getting the most out of every hour, every minute. The procrastinator is the veriest drudge. He has his nose to the grindstone all the time. He never has any time he can call his own. He is a slave to his own habit of laying things aside. Poor man. I am satisfied that of the failures of life, yes, 3/4 of them are due to the failure of persons to do their things now, not only because of what they lose directly by this habit, but because of the effects it produces upon their character. The shiftless habit of thought manifests itself in action. The thought and action long persisted in will lead to a demoralization of the entire character of the individual. He soon forgets how to do things right. And that is where so many people fail. The world is looking for people who can do things, and who can do them now. If you're one of the procrastinating kind, starting at once and get over it. Put up a sign before your desk, your sewing machine, your workbench, or wherever you spend most of your time. And have these words in big black letters on the sign: do it now. By carrying the thought of this now way of doing things and letting it manifest itself in action as frequently as possible, you will find that before long your entire mental attitude regarding work has changed, and you will find yourself doing things when they should be done without any particular effort on your part. The mind can be trained and taught to do things right. It needs a little courage, a little perseverance, a little willpower, but the result will pay you for your trouble. Starting to cure yourself of this bad habit, starting at once. Do it now. End of Do It Now by William Walker Atkinson. Read by Hassan.
Impressions of Adelaide, Australia. An excerpt from Advance Australasia, a day-to-day record of a recent visit to Australasia by Frank T. Bullen, 1907. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by John Hunter. The next morning, I awoke and stepped out upon the wide veranda into an air that was as heady as wine and almost too chilly for a sleeping suit. A perfect day, the golden sun flooding the world with light, the purple background of hills lying in slumberous shadow, and that sweet breeze pouring in upon the awakening city from the shimmering bay, just visible in patches from this elevation. Can this be Australia? My recollections of all her coasts from Townsville to Adelaide are very vivid, but they all include baking heat, scorching winds laden with sand, never at any time such a morning as this. But I must not stay indoors. It seems a sin unless compelled. So as soon as possible I emerge, to be astounded by every person I meet saying, "Very cold this morning, isn't it?" "Cold?" I gasp with amazement, for to me the climate seems as nearly perfection as climate can be on this side of paradise. As a matter of actual fact, the shade temperature is 52 degrees at 8 a.m. A stroll around the bright, cheerful, clean, magnificently paved streets brings me to the inevitable conclusion that such changes as have taken place in the last 26 years are hardly noticeable by me. The most prominent edifices in the city, the town hall and post office, were then erected, but beyond that I feel certain that the city's growth has been so slow that its beauty remains absolutely unimpaired. I hope the citizens will not feel aggrieved at my saying this, especially as I fail entirely to see how the tremendously rapid growth of a London suburb, for instance, which in 20 years will add to its area of buildings and population 2 cities of the size of Adelaide, makes for that which we all profess most earnestly to desire, the greatest good of the greatest number. There is on this first walk of mine alone, and on observation bent, an utter absence of those great variations between blatant wealth and squalid poverty, which are so painfully apparent at home and in America. And there is a generally diffused air of comfort prevailing among the people and in their dwellings that is to me most especially delightful to see. Even the ramshackle 2-horse trams which hump along the road seem to say almost defiantly, "We're proud of being evidences of the absence of hustle." Our people can have the electric trolley cars whenever they want them, but there is really not the least little bit of need for hurry in the world. And anyhow, all the roads in the city are just perfect to ride on, in either buggy or motor, on a bicycle or to walk on, So splendidly graded and beautifully kept is the asphalt of which they are composed. It is an object lesson patent to the most casual eye of the character of the people, this wonderful care of the roads. Of all the cities that I have ever seen, Adelaide comes easily first in the perfect beauty of its situation and arrangement. Level it is certainly, yet not nearly so level as it appears from the hills, with a lavish width of roadway even in what would in other places be mean streets, and beyond all the magnificent belt of parklands which environ it, set aside for the health and enjoyment of its citizens as long as it shall be a city, by wise, far-seeing old Colonel Light. Bitterly as he was reviled at the time for making such a selection of a site for the capital of the new colony. But it is not until the visitor has been taken in hand by some hospitable citizen, and, seated in a motor car, has been whirled away by winding roads through lovely scenery up the beautiful flanks of Mount Lofty, that he recognizes what a wonderfully handsome and ideally situated city it is. And there is a quiet exultation about those same citizens as, mounting higher and higher, they again and again invite you to survey the panorama beneath you that is most pleasant to witness. They do not brag, bid you, as they would if they were Yankees, burst into unstinted panegyric, but they wait confidently and quietly for the expression of your honest opinion, and I do not think they are ever disappointed. End of Impressions of Adelaide, Australia, an excerpt from Advance Australasia, a day-to-day record of a recent visit to Australasia by Frank T. Bullen, 1907.
The Last Letter of Major Sullivan Ballou by Sullivan Ballou. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Headquarters, Camp Clark, Washington, D.C., July 14th, 1861. My very dear wife, the indications are very strong that we shall move in a few days, perhaps tomorrow. Lest I should not be able to write you again, I feel impelled to write a few lines that may fall under your eye when I shall be no more. Our movement may be one of a few days' duration and full of pleasure, and it may be one of severe conflict and death to me. Not my will, but thine, God, be done. If it is necessary that I should fall on the battlefield for my country, I am ready. I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not halt or falter. I know how strongly American civilization now leans upon the triumph of the government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the Revolution, and I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. But, my dear wife, when I know that, with my own joys, I lay down nearly all of yours, and replace them in this life with cares and sorrows, when, after having eaten for long years the bitter fruit of orphanage myself, I must offer it as their only sustenance to my dear little children, is it weak or dishonorable, while the banner of my purpose floats calmly and proudly in the breeze, that my unbounded love for you, my darling wife and children, should struggle in fierce, though useless, contest with my love of country? I cannot describe to you my feelings on this calm summer night, when 2,000 men are sleeping around me, many of them enjoying the last, perhaps before that of death, and I, suspicious that death is creeping behind me with his fatal dart, am communing with God, my country, and thee. I have sought most closely and diligently, and often in my breast, for a wrong motive in thus hazarding the happiness of those I loved, and I could not find one. A pure love of my country and of the principles I have often advocated before the people, and the name of honor that I love more than I fear death, have called upon me, and I have obeyed. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence can break. And yet, my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly on with all those chains to the battlefield. The memories of all the blissful moments I have spent with you come crowding over me, and I feel most deeply grateful to God and you that I have enjoyed them so long, and how hard it is for me to give them up and burn to ashes the hope of future years when, God willing, we might still have lived and loved together and seen our boys grow up to honorable manhood around us. I know I have but few claims upon divine providence, but something whispers to me. Perhaps it is the wafted prayer of my little Edgar that I shall return to my loved ones unharmed. If I do not, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I love you, nor that, when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Forgive my many faults and the many pains I have caused you. How thoughtless, how foolish I have oftentimes been, and how gladly would I wash out with my tears every little spot upon your happiness, and struggle with all the misfortune of this world to shield you and my children from harm. But I cannot. I must watch you from the spirit land and hover near you, while you buffet the storms with your precious little freight, and wait with sad patience till we meet to part no more. But Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen around those they loved, I shall always be near you, in the garish day and the darkest night, amidst your happiest scenes and gloomiest hours, always, always. And if the soft breeze fans your cheek, it shall be my breath, or the cool air cools your throbbing temples, it shall be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me dead. Think I am gone, and wait for me, for we shall meet again. As for my little boys, they will grow as I have done, and never know a father's love and care. Little Willie is too young to remember me long, and my blue-eyed Edgar will keep my frolics with him among the dimmest memories of his childhood. Sarah, I have unlimited confidence in your maternal care and your development of their characters. Tell my two mothers I call God's blessing upon them. Sarah, I wait for you there. Come to me, and lead thither my children. Sullivan. End of the last letter of Major Sullivan Ballou by Sullivan Ballou. Read by T.Y.Lee.
Literature and the Stage by Charles Dudley Warner. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Is the divorce of literature and the stage complete, or is it still only partial? As the lawyers say, is it a vinculo, or only a mensa et thoro? And if this divorce is permanent, is it a good thing for literature or the stage? Is the present condition of the stage a degeneration, as some say, or is it a natural evolution of an art independent of literature? How long is it since a play has been written and accepted and played, which has in it any so-called literary quality, or is an addition to literature? And what is dramatic art as at present understood and practiced by the purveyors of plays for the public? If anyone can answer these questions, it will contribute something to the discussion about the tendency of the modern stage. everyone recognizes in the good old plays, which are occasionally revived, both a quality and an intention different from anything in most contemporary productions. They are real dramas, the interest of which depends upon sentiment, upon an exhibition of human nature, upon the interaction of varied character, and upon plot, and we recognize in them a certain literary heart. They can be read with pleasure. Scenery and mechanical contrivance may heighten the effects, but they are not absolute essentials. In a contemporary play, instead of character, we have characters, usually exaggerations of some trait, so pushed forward as to become caricatures. Consistency to human nature is not insisted on in plot. There must be startling and unexpected incidents, mechanical devices, and a great deal of what is called business, which clearly has as much relation to literature as the steps of a farcer in a clock dance. The composition of such plays demands literary ability in the least degree, but ingenuity in inventing situations and surprises. The text is nothing, the action is everything. But the text is considerably improved if it have brightness of repartee and a lively apprehension of contemporary events, including the slang of the hour. These plays appear to be made up by the writer, the manager, the carpenter, the customer. If they are successful with the modern audiences, their success is probably due to other things than any literary quality they may have, or any truth to life or to human nature. You see how this is in the great number of plays adapted from popular novels. In the dramatization of their stories, pretty much everything is left out of the higher sort that the reader has valued in the story. The Romance of Monte Cristo is an illustration of this. The play is vulgar melodrama, out of which has escaped altogether the refinement and the romantic idealism of the stirring romance of Dumas. Now and then, to be sure, we get a different result, as in Olivia, where all the pathos and character of the Vicar of Wakefield are preserved, and the effect of the play depends upon passion and sentiment. But as a rule, we get only the more obvious saliences, the bones of the novel, fitted in or clothed with stage business. Of course, it is true that literary men, even dramatic authors, may write and always have written dramas not suited to actors that could not well be put upon the stage. But it remains true that the greatest dramas, those that have endured from the Greek times down, have been, for the audiences of their times, both good reading and good acting plays. I am not competent to criticize the stage or its tendency, but I am interested in noticing the increasing non-literary character of modern plays. It may be explained as a necessary and justifiable evolution of the stage. The managers may know what the audience wants, just as the editors of some of the most sensational newspapers say that they make a newspaper to suit the public. The newspaper need not be well written, but it must startle with incident and surprise, found or invented. An observer must notice that the usual theater audience in New York or Boston today laughs at and applauds costumes, situations, innuendos, doubtful suggestions that would have blushed at a few years ago. Has the audience been creating a theater to suit its tastes, or have the managers been educating an audience? Has the divorce of literary heart from the mimic heart of the stage anything to do with this condition? The stage can be amusing, but can it show life as it is without the aid of idealizing literary heart? And if the stage goes on in this materialistic way, how long will it be before it ceases to amuse intelligent, not to say intelligent people? End of Literature and the Stage by Charles Dudley Warner. Read by Hassan.
Meriwether Lewis's 1803 letter to William Clark to co-lead the Lewis and Clark expedition by Meriwether Lewis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Washington, June 19th, 1803. Dear Clark, herewith enclosed you will receive the papers belonging to your brother General Clark, which some time since you requested me to procure and forward to you. Pray excuse the delay which has taken place. It has really proceeded from causes which I could not control. Mr. Thompson Mason, the gentleman in whose possession they were, is a member of the Virginia legislature, and was absent, of course, from his residence until March. Previous to his return, I was compelled to leave this place on a matter of business which has detained me in Lancaster and Philadelphia until the day before yesterday, and since my return, having possessed myself of the papers, I seized the first moment to forward them to you. In this claim, I wish you success most sincerely. From the long and uninterrupted friendship and confidence which has subsisted between us, I feel no hesitation in making to you the following communication under the fullest impression that it will be held by you inviolably secret until I see you, or you shall hear again from me. During the last session of Congress, a law was passed in conformity to a private message of the President of the United States, entitled, An Act Making an Appropriation for Extending the External Commerce of the United States. The object of this act, as understood by its framers, was to give the sanction of the government to exploring the interior of the continent of North America, or that part of it bordering on the Missouri and Columbia rivers. This enterprise has been confided to me by the President, and in consequence, since the beginning of March, I have been engaged in making the necessary preparations for the tour. These arrangements being now nearly completed, I shall set out for Pittsburgh, the intended point of embarkation, about the last of this month. And as soon after as, from the state of the water, you can reasonably expect me, I shall be with you, say about the 10th of August. To aid me in this enterprise, I have the most ample and hearty support that the government can give in every possible shape. I am armed with the authority of the government of the United States for my protection, so far as its authority or influence extends, in addition to which, the further aid has been given me of liberal passports from the ministers both of France and England. I am instructed to select from any corps in the army a number of non-commissioned officers and privates not exceeding 12, who may be disposed voluntarily to enter into this service, and am also authorized to engage any other men not soldiers that I may think useful in promoting the objects of success of this expedition. I am likewise furnished with letters of credit and authorized to draw on the government for any sum necessary for the comfort of myself or party. To all the persons engaged in this service, I am authorized to offer the following rewards by way of inducement. Firstly, the bounty, if not a soldier, but in both cases 6 months' pay in advance. Secondly, to discharge them from service if they wish it, immediately on their return from the expedition, giving them their arrears of pay, clothing, etc. And thirdly, to secure to them a portion of land equal to that given by the United States to the officers and soldiers who serve in the Revolutionary Army. This is a short view of means with which I am entrusted to carry this plan of the government into effect. I will now give you a short sketch of my plan of operation. I shall embark at Pittsburgh with a party of recruits, 8 or 9 in number, intended only to manage the boat and are not calculated on as a permanent part of my detachment. When descending the Ohio, it shall be my duty, by inquiry, to find out and engage some good hunters, stout, healthy, and merry young men, accustomed to the woods, and capable of bearing bodily fatigue in a pretty considerable degree. Should any young men answering this description be found in your neighborhood, I would thank you to give information of them on my arrival at the Falls of the Ohio, and if possible, learn the probability of their engaging in this service. This may be done perhaps by holding out the idea that the direction of this expedition is up the Mississippi to its source, and thence to the Lake of the Woods, stating the probable period of absence at about 18 months. If they would engage themselves in a service of this description, there would be but little doubt that they would engage in the real design when it became necessary to make it known to them, which I should take care to do before I finally engaged them. The soldiers that will most probably answer this expedition best will be found in some of the companies stationed at Massac, Kaskaskia, and Illinois. Pardon this digression from the description of my plan. It is to descend the Ohio in a keeled boat of about 10 tons burden, from Pittsburgh to its mouth, thence up the Mississippi to the mouth of the Missouri, and up that river as far as its navigation is practicable with a boat of this description, there to prepare canoes of bark or raw hides and proceed to its source, and if practicable pass over to the waters of the Columbia or Oregon River, and by descending it reach the Western Ocean. The mouth of this river lies about 140 miles south of Nootka Sound, at which place there is a considerable European trading establishment, and from which it will be easy to obtain passage to the United States by way of the East Indies in some of the trading vessels that visit Nootka Sound annually, provided it should be thought more expedient to do so than to return by the route I had pursued in my outward-bound journey. The present season being already so far advanced, I do not calculate on getting further than 200 or 300 miles up the Missouri before the commencement of the ensuing winter. At this point, wherever it may be, I shall make myself as comfortable as possible during the winter, and resume my journey as early in the spring as the ice will permit. Should nothing take place to defeat my progress altogether, I feel confident that my passage to the Western Ocean can be effected by the end of the next summer or the beginning of autumn. In order to subsist my party with some degree of comfort during the ensuing winter, I shall engage some French traders at Illinois to attend me to my wintering ground with a sufficient quantity of flour, pork, etc., to serve them plentifully during the winter, and thus be enabled to set out in the spring with a healthy and vigorous party. So much for the great outlines of this scheme. Permit me now to mention partially the objects which it has in view, or those which it is desirable to effect through its means, and then conclude this lengthy communication. You must know, in the first place, that very sanguine expectations are at this time formed by our government that the whole of that immense country, watered by the Mississippi and its tributary streams, Missouri inclusive, will be the property of the United States in less than 12 months from this date. But here, let me again impress you with the necessity of keeping this matter a perfect secret. In such a state of things, therefore, as we have every reason to hope, you will readily conceive the importance to the United States of an early friendly and intimate acquaintance with the tribes that inhabit that country, that they should be early impressed with a just idea of the rising importance of the United States and of her friendly dispositions toward them, as also her desire to become useful to them by furnishing them through her citizens with such articles by way of barter as may be desired by them or useful to them. The other objects of this mission are scientific, and of course not less interesting to the United States than to the world generally. Such is the ascertaining by celestial observation the geography of the country through which I shall pass, the names of the nations who inhabit it, the extent and limits of their several possessions, their relation with other tribes and nations, their language, traditions, and monuments, their ordinary occupations in fishing, hunting, war, arts, and the implements for their food, clothing, and domestic accommodation, the disease prevalent among them, and the remedies they use, the articles of commerce they may need or furnish, and to what extent, the soil and face of the country, its growth and vegetable productions, its animals, the mineral productions of every description, and in short, to collect the best possible information relative to whatever the country may afford as a tribute to general science. My instruments for celestial observation are an excellent set, and my supply of Indian presents is sufficiently ample. Thus, my friend, you have so far as leisure will at this time permit me to give to you a summary view of the plan, the means and the objects of this expedition. If therefore there is anything under those circumstances in this enterprise which would induce you to participate with me in its fatigues, its dangers, and its honors, believe me, there is no man on earth with whom I should feel equal pleasure in sharing them as with yourself. I make this communication to you with the privity of the President, who expresses an anxious wish that you would consent to join me in this enterprise. He has authorized me to say that in the event of your accepting this proposition, he will grant you a captain's commission, which of course will entitle you to the pay and emoluments attached to that office, and will equally with myself entitle you to such portion of land as was granted to officers of similar rank for their revolutionary services. The commission with which he proposes to furnish you is not to be considered temporary, but permanent if you wish it. Your situation, if joined with me in this mission, will in all respects be precisely such as my own. Pray write to me on this subject as early as possible, and direct to me at Pittsburgh. Should you feel disposed not to attach yourself to the party in an official character, and at the same time feel a disposition to accompany me as a friend any part of the way up to the Missouri, I should be extremely happy in your company, and will furnish you with every aid for your return from any point you might wish it. With sincere and affectionate regard, your friend and humble servant, Meriwether Lewis. End of Meriwether Lewis's 1803 letter to William Clark to co-lead the Lewis and Clark expedition. By Meriwether Lewis. Read by T.Y.Lee.
Statistics of Dreams by Meriwether Calkins. This LibriVox recording is a public domain. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Statistics of Dreams by Meriwether Calkins, instructor in psychology, Wellesley College. The phenomenon of dreaming has rarely been discussed or investigated in a thorough and in an experimental manner. Of description, of theory, of discussion, of poetical analogy and illustration, there has been no end. Of accurate observation, almost nothing. The most scientific books, those of Morey and Treatise, have been wholly or chiefly the result of the observation of abnormal subjects and the interest, more or less distinctly, of pathology. The fullest discussion of the subject, the works of Ratastock and of Spitzer, are largely compilations of the recorded dreams of other people. The basis of the following paper is the accurate record of the dreams of two people, from notes made by themselves during the night, and supplemented by careful study and recollection on the following day. The investigation was undertaken at the suggestion of Dr. Sanford and was carried on for 6 or 8 weeks. Its method was very simple: to record each night, immediately after waking from a dream, every remembered feature of it. For this purpose, paper, pencil, candle, and matches were placed close at hand. Early on the next day, with rare exceptions, these abbreviated notes were reread, copied in full, and enlarged by comments, by description of all attendant circumstances, and by the indication in all possible cases of the connection of the dreams with the waking life. During the first 6 weeks of the experiments, an alarm clock was used to wake the experimenter at different hours of the night. Later, the use of the clock was discontinued because the excitement of waking through its agency was often so great as to prevent a connected memory of the dream. Omitting so far as possible all general discussion of the nature of the explanation, physiological and psychological, of dreaming, I shall chiefly discuss the classified results of the observations to which allusion has been made. It will be well, therefore, to give at once the general results of the statistics and to indicate some of the difficulties. Chief among these is that of recalling dreams after one has waked. doubtless is due both to the lack of congruity between the waking and the dreaming life, and to the slight excitement which often accompanies the act of waking. To recall the dream requires usually extreme and immediate attention to the content of the dream. Sometimes a slight movement of reaching for paper and pencil or of lighting one's candle seems to dissipate the dream memory, and one is left with the tantalizing consciousness of having lived through an interesting dream experience of which one has not the faintest memory. To delay until morning the record of a dream, so vivid that one feels sure of remembering it, is usually a fatal error. During the progress of the observation, the account of one dream, apparently of peculiar significance, was written out in the dark by the experimenter, who then sank off to sleep with the peaceful consciousness of his scientific duty well done. In the morning the discovery was made that an unsharpened pencil had been used, and the experimenter was left with a blank sheet of paper and no remotest memory of the dream, so carefully recalled after dreaming it. The difficulty even remembering dreams suggests, of course, the impossibility of an exhaustive enumeration of their peculiarities, and of any positive conclusions from the figures of such tabular views as will be offered. At the best, one may discuss only dreams as remembered, and the power of recollection varies widely with age, temperament, health, and other conditions. A dream which is remembered in detail must have been a vivid one, but it is not true, as we often assume, that a vivid dream is necessarily well remembered, for both dream records here considered contain several cases of vivid dreams immediately forgotten. In one case, a distinctive memory of a vivid dream of a newspaper included no faintest recollection of the word on the page. It seems certain, therefore, that most people dream such oftener than they think. While some dreams thus escape the memory, the very effort to record may well tend in the contrary direction, toward an increase in their number. The observer with the record on his mind may sleep less soundly, dream more, and wake oftener. Too great an anxiety certainly has this effect. Finally, the student of dreams is in the danger of reading into his dream much that is characteristic of the waking consciousness, something as one interprets an animal's actions by their own, as a dog is said to reason when he performs instinctively, for aught we know, an act which would imply reasoning on our part. So emotions, thought, and deliberation, which were really absent from a train of dream images, may be supplied by the reflective after consciousness. With these preliminary cautions, one may turn to the study of the figures. The observers will be designated as S and C. S, a man of 32, who took notes for 46 nights and recorded 170 dreams. C, the writer, a woman of 28, took notes on 55 nights and recorded 205 dreams, an average of nearly 4 dreams a night in each case. Neither observer had previously regarded himself as a frequent dreamer. After the records were completed, each worked up the figures for his own dreams, with occasional conferences with the other. Such individual treatment was unavoidable where the relations of the content of the dreams to previous experience were to be considered. Some differences were thus introduced into parallel tables, but none of them are regarded as of great importance. A table is displayed on the page, Time of Dreams. The general result of these tables is, of course, to confirm the opinion that most of our dreams occur during light morning sleep. They show, however, conclusively, that the sleep of the middle of the night is in no sense a dreamless sleep, for of course the recorded number of before 4 a.m. and before 5 a.m. dreams is only a record of remembered dreams, and after the use of the alarm clock had been discontinued, fewer dreams from the middle of the night were recorded because of the infrequency in waking. The inquiry, whose results are next tabulated, was undertaken in order to discover the effects, if any, of the time of a dream on its connection with the previous waking life. A table is displayed on the page, Time versus Suggested Character of Dreams. The most obvious conclusion from this table is a close connection between the dream life and the waking life. In only 11% of the dreams is it impossible to discover such a connection. When, however, we seek to answer to our immediate question, it seems impossible to calculate accurately the influence of the time of a dream upon the degree to which it is associated with the waking experience. It is impossible to conclude that the dreams which follow most immediately upon our daydream experience will be more closely united with it than the morning dreams, and equally wrong to conclude that dreams during the lighter sleep of morning, near the waking state, will be more congruous with the waking life. Table 4 is displayed on the page. The figures in Table 4 are of the same general import as those of Table 3. Though the proportion of dreams suggested by waking life is much smaller, there is undoubtedly due in part to a different criterion in classifying. The dreams of S were very frequently pervaded with an atmosphere of experiment, not definite enough to warrant placing them in the class of vague suggestion, but undoubtedly dictated by the waking occupation, though possibly also by the very attempt to record the dreams. Furthermore, dreams in which the companions of waking life were present were not included as suggested dreams unless some incident of the dream was also suggested. The next tables embody an attempt to classify the dreams according to their vividness. The difficulty of this classification has been already suggested. Vividness and the fact of being distinctly recalled are not equivalent characteristics. Because a dream is indistinctly remembered, it is not fair to conclude that it is not a vivid one. Yet it is not safe to trust altogether to a mere memory of vividness without any support for the impression. The degree to which a dream is recalled, which may be roughly gauged by the length of the written record, is thus convenient, though not an absolute test of the vividness of a dream. Both factors enter into the following classification. Class 1 includes dreams which were very vivid and were remembered in detail. Class 2 comprises vivid dreams, usually less vivid than those of the first class, and less accurately remembered. Class 3 includes, in general, dreams of still less vividness, which are recalled in less detail, but contains a few cases of dreams which are largely forgotten, though remembered as vivid. Finally, Class 4 contains a record of dreams largely forgotten, which, so far as recalled, were indistinct. Table 5 is displayed on the page, Vividness of Dreams. Table 6 is displayed on the page, Observer C. In general, the dreams of C were written out in rather less detail than those of S, so that the comparative length of the record does not give an accurate idea of the comparative length of the dreams of the two observers. A notion of the principle of classification may be gained by referring to dreams 43, 193, C, 28, 111, S, which may have been included in Class 1, the dreams 91, 94, C, which belong to Class 2, and to dreams 19 and 68, C, of Class 3. These results are perhaps fairly indicative of the average vividness of dreams. The following table, and the inference which may be drawn from it, suggests that vivid dreams are by no means confined to morning hours, as might perhaps be supposed. Tables 7 and 8 are displayed on the following page, dreams before and after 4 a.m., Observer C and Observer S. It will be observed that a large proportion of dreams of a moderate degree of vividness, Class 2 and 3, occurring the night as toward morning. The percentage of most vivid dreams is greater after 4 a.m. That of the least vivid dreams, on the contrary, is greater among the night dreams than among those of the morning. We conclude, therefore, that the dreams after 4 o'clock tend to be more vivid than the earlier ones, but that the distinction is no absolute one. Dreams may be most conveniently classified according as they are connected through sense excitation with the immediate present, or through the fact of association with the waking life of the past, according that is, as they contain presentations or merely representations. Or in physiological terms, dreams are occasioned or accompanied by peripheral or by merely cerebral excitation. When I dreamed of hearing fire bells, and then seeing from my window the burning of a church, and waking to find my window shade flapping back and forth in a strong wind, this was evidently a presentation dream. On the other hand, when I dreamed of meeting Caroline Schlegel, after actually reading a story of her life, it was a representation dream. But as Spitter, who makes a similar division in Nervenritztraum and Psychisch-Trauma, suggests no dream belongs exclusively to one class or to the other, so that it is more accurate to refer to the presentation elements and to the representation elements in a dream. The following are the classified results of the dream records under this head. Tables displayed on the page, Presentation Elements in Dreams, Table 9. The most striking outcome of the figures is a relatively small number of dreams, which can be shown to include any sense perception. A closer inspection shows that, with both observers, the auditory dreams are of chief importance, a fact of common experience and readily explained sense. Next to sight, hearing is the sense most constantly exercised, and of the two is the more easily stimulated when the eyes are closed in sleep. Visual presentation dreams are less frequent, but dreams from dermal excitation occur comparatively often. and occasioning sensation is apt to be much exaggerated. For instance, a dreamer struggling to crawl from an elevator through an absurdly small opening into an 8th-floor apartment was traced directly to a cramped position and to a heavy covering across the face. A dream of a sleigh ride on an intensely cold day, and of hearing that the cornea of a friend's eyes had broken from the cold, was evidently occasioned by a stiff breeze blowing in at the window. Nightmare is often attributed to this cause, as the German name Alpendruck shows. Dreams through stimulus of the lesser senses, smell and taste, are infrequent but not unknown. Our observed dreams include none through stimulus of the sense of smell, but there are 2 clear instances of the taste dream, though in most so-called taste or smell dreams, one dreams of seeing food or flowers, not of actually tasting or smelling. Of dreams whose starting point is organic sensation, there are only 2 cases among those classified in Table 9. Common instances of such dreams are fright dreams in their simple form, or in the exaggerated nightmare stage, which are largely due to organic sensations of pressure for breath, of quick heart beating, or digestive discomfort. Our records contain no instances of dreams initiated by actual movement. So nearly as I can judge, the intrusion of the sense impression into the dream train is during the transition between sleep and waking, and the dreams or parts of dreams preceding the waking dreams are those understood by sense. In any case, the emphasis, by most writers, of dreams of this nature seems to be due to the fact that the dreams from which conclusions have been drawn are, in almost all cases, particularly striking and unusual dreams, and therefore not fairly representative of the rap and woof of dream experience. The most important feature of the present investigation is really the very prosaic and ordinary nature of most of the dreams recorded, and the exhaustiveness with which, during a number of weeks, all remembered dreams, and not merely peculiar and abnormal ones, were registered. The representation elements of a dream may enter through association of the first stage of the dream with the waking life, in which case we have what is properly a cerebral or representation dream, or may enter through an association within the dream of one element with another. In this latter sense, all dreams contain representation elements, or the very transformation of the sense excitation of the presentation dream into an image requires the associated process. A table is displayed on the page, Representation Dreams, Table 10. The following table presents a classification of what we have called representation elements of dreams. A table is displayed on the page, Representation Elements in Dreams, Table 11. The preponderance of visual images is very striking. The relation to auditory images, the figures indicate in both instances a ratio of about 3:2, seems to be the more remarkable in the case of C, who has no very vivid visual imagination, but on the other hand thinks habitually with words rather than with concrete images. Next to visual dreams, word dreams have been by far the most frequent, in the case of C, and have occurred often with S. There are many cases, in the formal records, in which the words have seemed to suggest the dream or to form its significant part. The words have been spoken, heard, read, and sometimes written. Very often they have been spoken and heard, or read and written, or spoken and read, in the same dream. The following table summarizes these results. The table is displayed on the page, Word Elements of Dreams, Table 12. English was the language of all these dreams, but in the following cases foreign languages were represented in the dreams of C, usually only by a word or a phrase, but sometimes more at length. German 5 cases, French 5 cases, Italian 1, Latin 1. C had many dreams which the connection with waking life and the occasion of the whole dream or of some part of it was a merely verbal association. Some of these dreams consisted wholly of the philosophical expressions, more or less logically combined, of the authors whom C was then very intently studying. In one case the application of such a philosophical phrase was very oddly turned. C had been reading Fich's Wissenschaft Philosophie, and the day before had wrestled with his description of the non-ego as bestimmbar aber nicht bestimmt. In the dream, C was discussing with a friend a matter of personal expenditure and told him, quite properly, that it was bestimmbar aber nicht bestimmt. Another time, after reading in the evening that Elizabeth Phelps Ward had bought a farm at Oak Hill, a dream followed of lunching at the Oak Farm restaurant. Sometimes a word was visualized in a dream. C, for instance, after reading just before falling asleep a list of words of which one was snake, dreamed of walking through tall grass and of seeing a snake in the path, and after reading Everett's Fitch, dreamed of meeting Dean Everett. Occasionally the dream began as a verbal one and grew from word to act, as when, from the reader of a romance, the dreamer became one of its actors. The following table covers most of these cases. Table 13 is displayed on the page. Observer C. Words are exactly remembered in 19 cases by S, in 5 only by C. 3 of these are cases of puns, which would never have been perpetrated in the waking life. An important result of the study of dream phenomena is the demonstration of the essential congruity and continuity of the dream life with the waking life. The stages and aspects of psychic activity which make up our dreams are recognized as those of which our whole conscious life consists, and a careful examination of dream phenomena tends to establish what Spitta calls complete unity of the human mind. Of course, perception occurs only in presentation dreams, in which actual sensation has stimulated the dream activity, and the characteristic sort of dream consciousness is the imaginative. A dream is in fact most simply defined as an illusion of the imagination in which images are reproduced, accurately and completely, or in fresh and varying combination. C twice dreamed in exact detail some immediately preceding event, a case of the simplest sort of mechanical imagination, in which the association was that of total recall. Far more often the representation of parts of one experience is combined with the representation of congruous parts of another, and most often the imagination reaches the emotional and erratic plane of fancy. But besides this unrecognized imagination, which is the dream activity as such, there is overt imagination, just as there is memory within a dream. In illustration of this, compare the following dream record, an extract from a longer one. April 7 to 8, 6:50 a.m. Observer S, Dream 111. Before that, had been camping out with a lot of 83 people and others, and I did not know, not far from where the gypsies used to camp on Lake M. I think I said I would stay as long as anybody at the camp, and wondered how it would seem at last when everybody had gone, and if it would not then seem good to get back to a boarding house. I thought of the one to which I should go in O, and also thought how things would have to be ranked up about the camp in the dust. The parenthesis contains a record of a distinct case of imagination within a dream. Accurate memory of real events in the waking life is not frequent, but occurs in well-marked cases. For instance, C twice recalled incidents appropriate to the dream situation of travel in Italy 40 years before. In another case, 2 factory girls applied for help in getting work, and C remembered the circumstances of certain actual labour troubles in Lynn, which made it unwise to send them there. The recorded dreams abound in instances of false memory, paramnesia. Dream persons and dream places are remembered on waking to have been widely different from the real people and places. Or the dream consciousness accounts for the presence of some unexpected person for some unfamiliar detail of the surroundings, by remembering something which never really happened. Not only imagination, but real thought occurs in dreams, though the fact is often denied. The frequency of conversation in dreams might be looked upon as a proof of the existence of the lower stages, conception and judgment, of thought activity, for both are necessary to the use and combination of words. But such dreams may be instances of merely visual or auditory memory of words, and if there were no instances of explicit judgment and of reasoning in dreams, the presence of thought could hardly be proved. But not only do we form judgments in our dreams, sometimes correctly, though often inaccurately, but we carry on whole trains of reasoning sometimes incorrectly, often correctly from absurd premises, and less often both correctly and from natural premises. Cf. the dream quoted on page 328. From many illustrations in the dream record, I select the following. Incorrect reasoning. Tuesday, March 31, 6:50 a.m. Dream 94, Observer C. When we think substantially in casuality, we think that which is out of time. But time we know exists, Therefore, substantiality and casuality must be given up. This is Mr. Huxley's argument. The following table includes these cases of imagination, of memory, and of thought in dreams. So constant an effort has been made not to support the dream facts by waking experiences, that the figures are rather too small than too large. A table is displayed on the page: Memory, Imagination, and Thought in Dreams, Table 14. Number of dreams included: S 133, C 165. Dream 94, quoted on page 325 from C's Dreams, is one of 24 called philosophical. The record of the shorter dreams among them suggests at once that they were really not in the least philosophical or reflective in character, but mere parrot-like memory of the words met over and over again in the reading. I am inclined to the view that this is often the case, but a dream like Mr. Huxley's argument, quoted above, is evidently one of thought, however inaccurate, on a metaphysical subject. Another case of the same sort is Dream 91, March 31, 6:50 a.m., Observer C. Father is arguing with certain people, especially with Mr. S. One point emphasized is casuality. I like Father's general line of thought, but object to his view on this point. I say, may I speak on the subject? Father is doubtful if there is time. I begin, what means a law of thought? Mr. S. It means nothing. I. But it stands for a fact. What fact? Casuality is a way in which the mind acts. A lady present compliments Father on his presentation of the subject. The so-called philosophical dreams of C have been classified as follows. A table is displayed on the page: Philosophical Dreams, Table 15, Observer C. The emotional quality of dreams varies greatly with different persons and with different conditions. C's dreams, though they are seldom actually painful, are apt to be pervaded by a generally unpleasant feeling, often rising in course to the stage of positive and excessive discomfort. To certain friends, however, dreaming is an almost uniformly pleasant experience. The following table gives the meagre results of the attempt to define the prevailing emotions of the recorded dreams. A table is displayed on the page: Emotions in Dreams, Table 16. Indications of volition in dreams are rarer, yet each dream record includes a few cases of well-marked deliberation followed by decision, so that one may safely deny the assertion often made that the will is never active in dreams. In the following dream there was distinct consciousness of an effort of will. Thursday, May 7, 5:30 a.m., Dream 193, Observer C. I am teaching a Greek class, a freshman college class. It appears to be beginning Greek. It suddenly occurs to me that they can better and more easily learn the Ionic dialect in connection with the Attic. So I tell them to open their Hadley and Allen grammars at the proper point and say, "Now, if you are not in my class next year, how surprised your teacher will be at what you know about Herodotus." At this point a strange woman enters with someone, whom I do not know, but who appears to have some connection with the college. She begins to address the class apparently for some philanthropic object. I step forward and say, "I am the instructor of this class. Will you show your authorization for interrupting it?" She answers that she has had permission, and finally shows me a certificate dated 1882 and signed A.E. Freeman. I tell her that the date is too early to be satisfactory. She says, "But this permission was a renewed one," and shows me an earlier one. I tell her that the permission is insufficient, but she begins to speak. I interrupt her and say, "Now one of the three things will occur. I shall interrupt you, or I shall get someone to stop you, or you will stop of your own accord." The woman argues with me she is poor and needs money. Note added later, I am greatly distressed and divided between my wish to be generous and my conviction of the impropriety of her proceeding. I say, "No matter, you should have the President's permission." She finally goes. The study of association in dreams is particularly interesting, though very elusive. One may notice not only the association of the dreams with the waking life, but that of the elements of a dream with each other. Its chief characteristic is the spontaneity resulting from the lack of fixed attention in dreaming, and from the absence of standards and norms of objective truth. This spontaneity, however, does not necessarily interfere with the consistency of plot, so to speak, in a large number of our dreams, which preserve one or all of the unities of time, place, or interest, so that they may be called this, by Sully's term, dramatic dreams. The spontaneity and freedom of dream association are due, as we have said, due to the general lack of sense impressions. Sometimes, however, the associative train is sharply turned by the intrusion of presentations, not recognized as such, or by irrelevant associations to which insufficient selective judgment is opposed. They result what Spitter calls the Eindienstbrunch of dreams. The frequent breaks in the continuity of dream life make it impossible to classify dream associations after any of the ordinary methods. Often, however, they are emotional. The persistence of some feeling of the waking life seems to determine the character of the associated dream features. From this source arise the dreams of presentiment, according either with hope or with fear. Two quantitative distinctions of association are constantly illustrated in dreams. We often relive in dreams, in exact detail, scenes through which we have just passed. More often, as we have seen, one very small element of a dream image is accentuated and followed by an associated image of which the greater part in turn fades away, leaving a small portion which is followed by its congruent image. In the first case, we have instances of total reintegration. The second illustrate modulation in association, continued focalized reintegration. It is needless to give examples, for everybody recognizes this quality of his own dreams, or the absurdity or incoherence of dreams is accounted for by this feature of the associative process. The definite question of the subject matter of our dreams is partially answered through our dream statistics about the persons, places, time, and character of these dreams. The lists of dramatic personae are very long, and suggest that the dream world is well peopled. Two tables are displayed on the following page: Table 17, Observer S, and Table 18, Observer C. Number of times dreaming about people. In the following tables, the letters have the same signification as in those last presented. A table is displayed on the following page: Locale of Dreams, Table 19. By far the most conspicuous feature of this place classification is a prominence of places associated with the life of the present. This tallies exactly with the result of the dream census of persons, by which the associates of our dreams are seen to be in large number the companions of the everyday life of the immediate present, and the result falls in also with a surprising conclusion from the attempt to classify dreams according to the time in which, as one dreams, one supposes oneself to be living. In all the 375 cases which our records include, there is no instance of a dream in any other than the present time, when the dream was of the childhood's home, or of some person who had not been seen for many years. The apparent age of the dreamer was never lessened to avoid anachronism. Whatever the place or character, the subject was always at his proper age and in his general condition of life, excepting, of course, in the few cases of changed identity. It is thus evident that the dream is connected with waking life, and in the experience of these observers, usually with recent life. But what besides recency determines the exact line of association, the particular elements which, in a sense, are reproduced in the dream? If we were discussing waking association, we should name two other factors, vividness and frequency, and should especially emphasize the fact that the subjects of conscious thought or imagination are those in which we are most deeply interested. The first impression is that the same holds true of dreams, and that the subjects of dreams are those in which our waking interest is centered. The opinion seems to be strengthened by the fact of the prominence in dreams of well-known people and places, yet a careful examination of one's dreams contradicts this view, as is suggested in the following table. Table displayed on the page: Connection of the dream with life, Table 20. This table is a very inadequate one because of the difficulty of defining closely the terms, especially personal and trivial. The former is used, in general, of dreams which are individual in their character, essentially connected with oneself, so that they could hardly be dreamed with reference to another person. Such are mostly dreams about one's own home. The trivial accidental dream or dream element is one so unimportant that it might equally well be dreamed with reference to another person or situation. The figures, however, little one emphasizes their rigid accuracy, certainly indicate what any one may verify by examination of his own dreams, the constancy of the trivial and the accidental, the tendency of the unimportant events of the waking life to reappear in our dreams, and the surprising fewness of the cases in which the dream is associated with that which is of paramount significance in one's waking experience. The so-called personal dreams seldom, if ever, refer to really important phases of personal relation. A little reflection on the subjects about which one does not dream cannot fail to strengthen this view. In times of bereavement one seldom dreams of the dead. The fact is often denied, chiefly because of the overwhelming impression produced by the infrequent dreams of this nature. Yet it is proved by the experience of all whom I have questioned, by the examination of the dream records, and by the careful inquiries of M. Hervis Delage, the only writer, so far as I know, who has faced this problem. Monsieur Delage was profoundly impressed by the fact that during a long time of deep personal sorrow he never once dreamed of the friend whom he had lost, though he tried to provoke such dreams. There were at least 2 occasions during the months of investigation when, after days of very vivid memories, one of the observers confidently expected to dream of a friend who had died, yet actually dreamed only of the most trivial events. Both S and C during the whole time dreamed of the dead very seldom and in unimportant connection with other persons. The scrutiny of these dream records, in fact, bears out M. Delage's conclusion. En règle générale, les ideas qui ont obsédé l'esprit pendant la vie ne reviennent pas en rêve. On ne rêve des événements importants, qui, lorsque l'époque où ils préoccupent l'esprit d'un haut degré s'est éloigné. M. Delage's examination of the facts is very satisfactory, but his theory cannot be accepted. Every image or thought, he says, has a definite amount of energy. If this force be dissipated by directing to the image or idea and waking attention and interest, then none is left by which it may be lifted above the threshold of the dream consciousness. But if, as in the case of a trivial event, the attention has been diverted from it and never rested on it exclusively, then when most presentations are barred out by sleep, when the ordinary activities of thought, judgment, and attention are wholly wanting, or at least lethargic, then the trivial image or thought will rise into consciousness and be transmitted through the dream alchemy into the rich and varied material of the dream. Passing by the untenable Herbartian assumption that ideas possess an independent existence of their own, one notices at once that the theory fails to account for all the facts. It is not true that one never dreams of subjects of vital interest to oneself. The home, the family, the school, professional business figure in all our dreams, and yet are of deepest interest to ourselves. All these subjects, however, are connected with persons, places, or things of which we have frequent sense impressions. In the professional dreams, which form so large a class of Table 20, the laboratory, the apparatus, the books, the words, are the professional elements of the dreams, and all involve sense perception. On the other hand, the persons of the dead and of the long absent, as well as the intimate thoughts, hopes, and ideas of the inner life, involve the waking imagination, thought, emotion, and will, but not the sense perception. The connection of the dream with the waking life, so far as it can be traced, is therefore simply this. The dream will reproduce, in general, the persons, places, and events of recent sense perception or of very vivid imagination, not the objects of ordinary imagination, of thought, of emotion, or of will, so far as these are not also perceived objects. Furthermore, thoughts, emotions, experiences, and personal relations that mean most to us are generally extremely complex and depend for their reproduction on the integrity of very many lines of association. When a number of these are put temporarily out of function by sleep, it is next to impossible to bring about these complicated mental states, though less complicated ones can be reproduced with tolerable completeness. Up to this point, the results of this classification of actual dreams have emphasized throughout the intimate connection of the dream with the waking life and the essentially normal character of the dream activity. Yet the characteristics which distinguish the dream from the rest of the psychic life are no less prominent. Fundamentally, these are 3. The comparative feebleness of the intention and the will, the want of discrimination, and the relative lack of perception. Heraclitus says that each man has his own world in sleep, but a world in common with others when awake, and Fichte describes the objective world as created by the absolute ego. while the dream world is the creation of the individual I. Both sayings point to the essential feature in which dreams diverge from the rest of the psychical experience, the appearance of objective reality which prevents the recognition of their subjective character. Of this phenomenon, these three explanations have been suggested. Most of the sense impressions are lacking which furnish to the waking consciousness the common test of reality. The weakness of the thought activity facilitates that wrong application of the category of causality implicit in the false reference to a phenomenon of imagination to an external cause and in the incorrect explanation of a sense experience. The diminution of attention prevents the scrutiny of images and areas sufficient to the discovery of their subjectivity. There are three stages in the dream illusion. The first is that simple objectivation which we have already described and which is characteristic of all dreams. In the next higher stage, one attributes one's own thoughts and feelings to other individuals, sometimes explicitly recognizing one's own ignorance. Of this nature is the dream which Johnson naively describes. He is conversing with a man who said more witty things than he. Another time-honored example is that of Van Goens, who dreamed of himself in a recitation in which, after a most painful effort, he failed, only to hear his neighbour correctly answering the same question. Maury dreamed of a person who told him the location of the place Wyandotte, and of another who corrected his English sentence, "I called for you," by suggesting the idiomatic, "I called on you." Both these bits of information Maury, in his waking moments, did not consciously possess. These dreams in which the dreamer figures as the important hearer of what he himself does not appear to know are the most striking examples of this dream dramatization. But every conversational dream illustrates the same illusion. Besides the general occasions of all objectivation, one observes here a failure of definite recollection. A vivid speech image of one's own thought is followed by the vivid image of some person, and the two are associated through lack of definite memory of the connection of the thought with oneself. Finally, the loss of the personal identity may become explicit. One imagines oneself to be another, or one is double of oneself, and then there is a second self whom one sees or hears. The special feature of these dreams is sometimes characteristic as a loss of self-consciousness. Spitter considers that the important differentiation of dream from waking is Dauernd des Schlafens erträgt Offenbarung des Selbstbewusstseins. But he makes the Herbartian distinction between Bewusstsein and Selbstbewusstsein, and declares that in Trauma ist nur das Bewusstsein vorhanden des Selbstbewusstsein nicht. The fact that explicit self-consciousness is almost always present in dreams, and that the individual ego is exceptionally prominent in the dream life. The loss of identity in dreams is not a loss, but a change in doubling of self-consciousness. It is probably correct to explain by its feature to recall the events of one's past history or to localize them as referring to oneself. The result is a loss of remembered experience which suggests changed identity, yet all the time one is considered that it is oneself who is changed or whose identity is doubled. Images of qualities, actions, or words belonging to others are simply associated with the image of oneself or the connection with one's own life. One's name, relatives, appearance is forgotten simply, or these images are projected outward as when one goes to one's own funeral or listens to one's own conversation, but always there is an observing self. An example of first sort of dream, which is often a sort of romance dream, is the following. Dream 43, Sunday, March 22, 6 a.m. Observer C. I am at first the reader of a story, then the servant, and then the sister of the hero. Finally, I assume my own character. The hero goes through great distress, runs up and down long staircases, has false information given him. Here the scene is partially in Italy, looking off to the Mediterranean. Finally, after eluding pursuers, the hero plunges through a sort of tunnel in the snow, which guidepost warns us is very dangerous. I, his servant, follow. We are unharmed. We realize that the guidepost was treacherous. We reach up many stairs, the home of the hero's beloved. He and I, now his sister, enter her room. She is not there. Then we enter the dining room. He demands her. The family shudder, and one says, "Du hast sie." I realize that she has died, and cry out to him, "Ich felicitiere dich." She is yours now, here, en untrue famille has kept her from you. It now appears that all the hero's ribs are broken. I advise him to die and join his beloved, but for some reason he refuses. Suddenly the hero turns into my father, whose ribs are broken, and who is questioning whether he would not better die, while I, in my own character, refuse to let him. A frequent feature of the change in one's own identity, and of the swift transformation of one's dream figure into another, is a psychological experience known as paramnesia, which is very common in dreams, though what seems paramnesia, in the waking life and in dreams, may be often the actual memory of an incident of some forgotten dream. The paramnesia of dreams appears in various forms. People or things, absolutely unrecognized by the waking self, appear in our dreams as familiar, or a familiar person is endowed with qualities, personal or intellectual, which are quite foreign to him, and well-known localities are altered in certain features. Such illusions, it is evident, may be traced directly to the weakness of attention and judgment. Heterogeneous images occurring in close succession are referred to the same external object. Our recorded dreams are full of instances of this sort. There are instances of it in the long dream, number 193, quoted in page 328. A very detailed example is recorded in the following extract from Dream 78, March 29-30. Immediately before waking, observer S, when I left the chapel, I took a car. There was one track that turned off very soon to the right, the other swerved to the left and kept on up the hill. It seemed to me at first that I ought to be in a car that turned to the right, and had taken a wrong one. Then I remembered that this is the car I have been in before, and I am all right. I looked back out of the car. I saw something like a galvanized iron ash barrel rise rapidly at the end of a long iron arm and enter the opening of an enormous tin tube, like a reflecting telescope 30 feet in diameter. This projected from the roof of a shed or from between the houses. It seemed rusty and in one place somewhat broken. I remembered having been over the same line before and to have seen the tube before. Note, certainly paramnesia, never saw anything of the kind. A favourite type of paramnesia, especially with one of the experimenters, was the dream of writing the records of a previous dream. The incoherence of dreams proceeds from two main causes, one of which we have already discussed, the swift changes of dream images through a process of modulated association. In this respect, the dream resembles reverie, in which also the will and the judgment are in abeyance, and the subject half unconsciously makes indents sprung from the slender perch of thought to another. The second course of incoherent dreams is effective also in reverie. This is the intrusion of presentations into the change of images and thoughts, and is a common feature also of dreams and of madness. As in the case of dreams, such presentations sometimes abruptly change the course of subconsciousness, and sometimes are woven into its strands. Samori tells the story of the madman on shipboard whose demon swore in Italian and made use of the real oaths of the sailors. But we may overestimate the incoherence of dreams in our memory of them. It is easier to remember events which are in the line of our daily life than to recall the more or less fantastic or unusual train of dream consciousness, so the gaps in some of the dreams may be breaks in memory. The fantastic or absurd dream to which we have just alluded is not the same as the incoherent dream, for though all incoherent dreams are in a sense absurd, these are highly fantastic and improbable dreams, which move on in stately and uninterrupted measure. The following dream is one of this kind. I quote only part of it. Dream 157, April 22-23, 6:05 a.m. Observer S. I dream of a kind of intelligent elephant that is to be executed by electricity, and which I have charge of executing. The elephant is to be fastened to the march, rotation apparatus, or rather a polished edition of it in the library, or in a front room otherwise nearly empty. I get things ready so far as I can, and propose to go to work the next day. The elephant objects, and by degrees I come to talk the matter over with him. I am a little surprised at first at his talking, but remember how intelligent an animal the elephant is reported to be, and find it very convenient to talk with him. He seems to appreciate the awkwardness of my position, and talks rather kindly. Not maintaining that he won't smash things with all his might when he feels the current, but is yet self-controlled. The following table gives the number of absurd dreams counted by both experimenters among those on record. Under the head Impossible are included only natural impossibilities, like the speaking elephant and the skull transferred by a surgical operation to the head of a living subject. Not such dreams as those of meeting with people who have died. Of very improbable dreams, an example is the romance dream. Table 21 is displayed on the page. The absurdity of dreams is clearly due to the weakness of the judgment. When our waking imagination confronts us with impossible things, though they have the vividness of the hypnagogic illusion, we yet currently judge that they have not, or at least in their apparent form, objective reality. In the dream we accept all images with a passive belief in their externality. It is untrue, however, to assert, as so many do, that surprise is never felt in dreams. In the elephant dream just quoted, the judgment asserted itself in the surprise, with which, at first, the talking of the elephant was heard, but the wonder was soon quieted by the vividness of the impression. It is interesting to observe that reflective thought was still present in the dream, since the peculiarity of the elephant was at once explained in true national history style. This possibility of dream thought, active enough to explain dream images, but not keen enough to deny their externality, has appeared already in the skull dream, in which wonder at the insouciance with which the remarkable piece of surgery is performed, and the deductions drawn from it, is accompanied by the complete acceptance of the fact and by much reasonable reflection on it. It is true, however, that we constantly witness in our dreams, without a quaver of surprise, scenes and events of the most wildly improbable character, and just as the dreamer literally does not know enough to be surprised, so also his judgment plays him false in the recognition of the beautiful. I cannot recall a single distinct waking memory of any beautiful dream object, though it is common enough to dream of something as really beautiful which one recognizes, through the waking recollection, as merely fantastic or bizarre. It has happened, to many of us, to write dream verses which have seemed to the poeticizing dreamer exquisitely beautiful, but which are recognized by the waking critic as sheer doggerel. 4. One characteristic popularly attributed to dreams is open to question. It is by no means so certain as some of us think that the train of thought and imagery in dreams is swifter than that of the waking life. This assertion needs, of course, to be fortified, for there are innumerable instances which seem to prove the alleged swiftness of dreaming. The experience of Napoleon, who dreamed of a journey, a siege, and a cannonading, and woke while some slight explosion was still reverberating, to find himself in the midst of the journey, out of Manchot, who dreamed the scenes of the Reign of Terror, his own arrest and trial, and the falling of the guillotine, and was waked by the falling of some part of the bed upon his chest. These are only two of the stories, of which there is already a large collection. Morey tells these and others, and gives two proofs from his own experience of the swiftness of dreams. He has often had long dreams while reading aloud to his mother, in naps which were so short that his mother never marked a pause. His brother, while talking in his sleep, used clipped words spoken so swiftly that they were barely understood. When one tries, however, to render to oneself any definite account of a shortening of the perception of time, it is almost impossible to do so. Cicé's remark, les impressions étaient plus vives, la diation se fait plus rapidement, is not adequate, for it is only occasionally that the impressions are more vivid. It is therefore more than likely that only the memory time, not the actual conscious process of the dream, is quickened. In the free association of the dream, the representation of one event immediately suggests that of some natural consequence, which objectively must be separated from it by a long expanse of time. But in the reproduction after waking of these chief links in the series of images, these Hauptwurzelungen, the memory adds to the intervening links, and one believes that one has dreamed them. The vivid images of the dream become representative of the others. Niemals, says Spitter, ist en Traumvorstellung genau und bis ins Detail ausgebildet. The retrospective lengthening of the time is more natural because the number of images, as compared with thoughts in a dream, is always large, and the presence of many images always makes the memory time long. It is possible also that in many dreams of this sort, which are narrated, the early parts may have been dreamed before the sense excitation which is supposed to have occasioned the whole dream. So Napoleon may have been dreaming of a siege, and more short of a trial before the explosion or before the blow, which was simply incorporated into a dream already begun. A scientific discussion of dreams may profitably omit many subjects which have especially interested most of the ancient and modern writers. The question whether the soul ever sleeps may be relegated to the realm of metaphysics, since there is little hope of observation minute or extended enough to answer it experimentally. The importance of the dream as a revealer of character is not a suggestive topic. When one has discovered that both will and judgment are relaxed or altogether lacking, and that the very subjects of one's dreams are unconnected with one's deepest interests. The nature of provision in dreams and the explanation of so-called prophetic dreams have received a certain modern interest from the labourers of Myers, Gurney, and others. The first remark to be made is that the number and the significance of these have inevitably been exaggerated. Such dreams are seldom accurately recorded, and the after-experience, the so-called fulfillment, supplies details which one then believes that one has dreamed, even when the illusion does not rise to complete paramnesia. In the second place, it may safely be asserted that a large number of these dreams admits of a perfectly natural explanation. Previsions of illness were long ago assigned by Hippocrates to real organic sensations, with which are associated images of illness. A prevailing emotion persistent in sleep is associated with the image of some event as its occasion, and in the course of time this actually does occur. Perhaps some object perceived during the day and then forgotten determines the character of this event. Delage gives an admirable instance. A friend of his, a physician, had a terribly vivid dream of the death and burial of his father. He waked and found beneath the door of his room a telegram really announcing his father's illness. He hastened away, cared for his father during a severe illness, and succeeded in saving his life. The whole has all the air of a prophetic dream until one discovers that the telegram has been slipped beneath his door during the evening preceding his dream. He has seen it without attending to it, and the blue envelope has suggested the dream, corresponding so closely with the reality. Our dream records contain 5 cases of dreams in which there was a certain congruity between dreams and subsequent events. One is unimportant, a dream of the arrangement of articles in a magazine, and an unexpected note on the next day, with reference to arrangement of matter at a time when this work was engaged in considerable attention. In another dream, a remark is made about someone in whom the dreamer is much interested, so incongruous with the waking opinion that the dream is completely forgotten, and is not even recalled when a month later the same surprising story is heard and believed. This provision, which was very exact, would have been entirely unnoticed but for the dream record. The other 3 dreams may be quoted. They all closely anticipate coming events, but are so essentially trivial and unimportant that there is no temptation to endow them with telepathic qualities. Dream 95, April 4th to 5th, 4:10 a.m. Observer S. Dream of visiting. Wellesley College. M and I are shown over the buildings. Among other things, I am taken to see a little rotunda where a register of visitors is kept. The floor of the rotunda is black and white marble, and has a few palms or other plants in it. It is rather poorly lighted. I think of Y.M., a former pupil, as being there, and am not sure that I do not see her in the distance. Weeks later, an actual visit to Wellesley was made, which had not been planned at the time of the dream. A rotunda, with the black and white marble floor and the palms, was seen, and a visitor's registry was found in another building. The suggestion of the dream was probably the casual mention the day before of an acquaintance at Wellesley, but there is no remembered occasion for the close likeness of the dream's scenery to the actual surroundings. Yet it certainly is easier to suppose some forgotten picture or description recalled in the dream. Dream 161, April 24-25, Observer S. Immediately before waking, I dream of being in O. I see Dr. Y in a reclining chair on the sidewalk. I speak to him and he refers to the next journal, saying that he can easily get up matter on ether anesthesia. The next day Dr. Y, who lives 40 miles away, makes a visit and actually speaks of the journal. The provision is very close, but it's not easy to escape the conviction that it is a mere coincidence, and the journal is a common object of thought and of perception. Dr. Y is one of its contributors, and a piece of Dr. Y's apparatus may have been in the mind of the experimenter at about this time. Dream 19, Friday, March 13 or 14, 11:35 p.m. Observer C. I'm coming from Cambridge on the cars with M. M, whose aunt will meet her at Harvard Square. M is coming from Newbury Street, but will go back home. She wears a red cloak. Streetcar dreams were not uncommon at this time, for the dreamer of them was going back and forth from Cambridge several times a week. But on March 28, a fortnight later, Miss M was actually met on a Cambridge car. The strangest part of this correspondence of dream and reality is that Miss M had been more than a year in Brooklyn and was at home for only 2 days. But even here, forgotten suggestion seems a more likely explanation than telepathy. If in a large number of dream experiences suggested by the affairs of daily life and peopled with a larger part of one's acquaintance, there should be no coincidences, that in itself would be a most remarkable fact. For these formulated results of the dream statistics of only 2 observers, no wide generality is claimed, and there are several dream experiences of which the records show no trace. The dream, for example, that recurs always in the same form, and the dream of childhood in which the dreamer is himself a child again. Perhaps the most important effect of the whole study is the suggestion of questions which it does not answer, and the indication of the useful possibilities of such study as it is in everybody's power of the psychical phenomena of his own life. Such investigation must be slow and painstaking. It is not likely to lead to any startling results, but it cannot well fail to bring into stronger relief old truths previously accepted on hearsay, to correct traditional views, to supplement formula by facts, and at least to suggest some new aspect of psychological science. End of Statistics of Dreams by Meriwether Colkins. Recorded by Leon Harvey for LibriVox.org. A Study of Dreams by Julius Nelson. From the American Journal of Psychology, Volume 1, May 1888, Number 3. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, recorded by Leon Harvey. A Study of Dreams by Julius Nelson. Every psychological inquiry should, as far as possible, be based upon and connected with so much of physiological knowledge as we can command. It is not our desire to do this in the present article in any thorough manner, but for the purpose of introduction and orientation, a few primary principles may be premised. Look at the subject from whatever point of view we may. We cannot escape the fundamental conclusion that the human body in its entirety is a cell state or colony. The individual acquires his character as a unit from the extreme differentiation and consequent division of labor obtaining among the cell units. There can, therefore, in reality, be no new physiological or psychological function or faculty or characteristic in the soma which was not and is not in the cells. If the complex body seems to differ markedly in its powers from the simple cell, it is because the work necessary to sustain the life of a cell has been distributed among many units, and thus many diverse combinations and interrelations of the cell functions become possible. Nutrition and growth and reproduction, respiration and movement, irritability or response to stimuli, heredity and variability, and probably spontaneity or will are the fundamental properties of protoplasm in its simplest state. All other powers of living things are secondarily derived by evolution, i.e. differentiation, of these primary properties due to the educating forces of the environment acting through time. All these questions in biology and psychology, then, ultimately rest on cell physiology. We know very little about cell physiology, but we do know a few facts, the knowledge of which will prevent us from making rash statements about the relations of brain cells to mental processes, such as are frequently made and which carry the air of final explanations. Such statements are that images, stimuli, ideas are impressed on the cell protoplasm just as if it were a photographic plate, and that consciousness simply reads these impressions. Memory is the strength with which protoplasm retains the impressions. When we learn a new thing, it is stored up in a new cell, or a new connection between old cells is made. Finally, it is asserted that nerve force, or at least stimuli, once flowing along a certain line or direction, maps out a path along which it becomes easier for it to flow next time, and so we form habits. The nerve fibers are supposed to represent the morphological results of such flows of force. All this is crude fancy and finds no support in modern cytology. All the changes that take place in cells are undoubtedly chemical and physical, but the actions of cell life are not explained even when we are able to write the whole equation of the correlation and transformation of the forces present. We would still have to account for the reason of the change, for the organization of these forces, and in fact, for that which makes the phenomena vital as distinguished from non-living chemical transformations. We know that complex chemical compounds are built up in cells with attendant absorption of oxygen. This requires energy, and that is furnished by the breaking down of the highly complex substances furnished by the food, lymph, and blood. Then, when the cell works, there is a liberation of energy due to the breaking down of these highly complex molecules, and waste products are thrown into the blood. The latest researchers seem to show that, if not all the energy of a working cell, at least a great deal more than was formerly supposed, is furnished by the breaking down, not of the food directly, but of the living substances of the cell, which have themselves been built up out of the food. This is shown by the remarkable chemical and morphological changes which the chromatin of the nucleus undergoes when cells are active. It is the chromatin, as we have shown elsewhere, and is as now widely believed among cytologists, that, as it were, the brain or soul of the cell. In it inheres the psychic or hereditary powers, and if it be removed from a cell, the rest of the protoplasm behaves automatically. The cell then moves mechanically, cannot reconstruct itself, and finally wears itself out and decomposes. The difference between the chromatin and chemical substances that are devoid of chromatin is this. In the latter case, any drug or stimulus produces an effect in accordance with fixed laws, but the chromatin has the power of interpreting stimuli as reactions are intelligently directed towards the preservation of its own life, and thus of the cells, and hence of the body. When a poison is absorbed by a cell, such poison forms chemical compounds with the protoplasm. Therefore it is a poison, but the chromatin does not allow itself passively to be destroyed, but at once manufactures more chromatin as fast as it can, and thus supplies more than sufficient to satisfy the poison, and then the cell proceeds to excrete the saturated compounds. In this way the chromatin can be educated to endure a great quantity of poison. The morphological structure of cells is such as the conditions of nature have shown necessary and advantageous for allowing the chromatin to live and grow, to differentiate, to receive stimuli, and to react upon the external world. Hence we have the chromatin in one or many spherical bodies in a nucleus, and the whole encompassed by cell plasma that serves it for a house and for organs of relation. The structure of cells, therefore, is such as enables them best to do their work, such as absorbing food and moving by sweatophobia or cilia. This is not the slightest hint of structure with relation to anything else. They who think the complex structure of higher animals is in some way mirrored in their cells, or in the cytological structure of the eggs from which the cells are the descendants, do greatly err, and have not conceived the problem of heredity from the vital and psychic standpoints. Cytologically at least, the ovum of a complex animal is as simple, even simpler, than many of the single-celled animals. In the same way must we think of the brain cells as in no great respect different from other cells. All cells are endowed with the fundamental properties of living matter, and when differentiation comes in, it is simply a distribution of these properties. A nerve cell is one differentiated, especially to receive and react to stimuli in such relations or connections as to correlate organs. A muscle cell is one so constructed as to react by manifesting as great an amount of motion as possible. When a nerve cell acts, there must be a breaking down of chromatin, just as when a liver cell acts. Who can prove that a splitting up of chromatin in one case differs from that in the other, and who can imagine how such difference can account for consciousness or any psychic characteristic ideas and sensations? Can we conceive that food which, a little while ago, was solvent in the lymph, and now has been built up into a complex molecule of chromatin, can remember, when a vibration reaches it and causes it to break up, that the chromatin which was its predecessor was broken up by a stimulus of like kind. Even supposing that the nerves are differentiated so as to transmit different sorts of vibrations or stimuli for the different sorts of external excitants, which is indeed an open question. We see then that if anybody wishes to believe in spirit apart from matter, that this spirit can be organized and be an immaterial governor or material forces with which it can be in mysterious connection, and that the properties of spirit and of matter are in no way similar, but totally dissimilar. Such belief is in no way shaken by the very most recent advances of biological science. We have seen that when a cell acts in any manner, there is a degradation of chromatin. If this activity breaks down the chromatin faster than it can be built up, the cell must stop and rest. This resting, when it takes place in the higher psychic centers, presents the phenomenon of sleep. Only a few cells of the body sleep, and as many parts of the brain are in no wise tired out, they may still act during sleep. If these are the cells involved in psychic processes of some sort or other, we get dreams. In order that the tired brain cells may be allowed to rest undisturbed, the vital functions of the body are lowered to a minimal intensity. The easiest position is assumed, secluded from stimulation from the external world, because many of the cells are in good and increasingly good condition to react on stimuli, so that if these are not shut out, the restoration would be interfered with. Here, habit controls the action, for when the cells receive stimuli that have no significance for the welfare of the body, they do not react. The cells have to be educated to this attitude, for when unusual stimuli, as from a strange sleeping place, strikes the senses, our sleep is more or less disturbed. The blood does not flow so much to the brain during sleep, yet is not altogether shut out, because food and oxygen are needed to restore the tired cells. This fact has much significance, for we know that when an organ acts, it receives an extra amount of blood, and that in a general way the character of our mental activities is controlled by the amount of blood in the acting cerebral ganglia. It is therefore quite possible that some ganglionic cells act in a feeble way all night, but because of the feebleness of the action, we never recollect anything about it. But there may be disturbing cases, such as irregularity in the relation of controlling centers, or stimuli from diseased or uncomfortable organs, that tend to set certain ganglia into activity and call for an increased flow of blood to the part, and thus vivid dreams will arise. As morning approaches and the cells have gotten well rested and are quite irritable, they are ready to explode their chromatin at slight offence, and at last there is a general awakening, which is accompanied by a return of blood to the brain. There cannot help but be a dawn in consciousness just before getting awake and becoming aware of the external world, and thus people generally wake up out of a dream state. Of course, the character of dreams will depend on several factors, such as the extent of the brain involved, the amount of irritability, and in a general way the sort of stimulus, and of course on the interests, education, and experiences of the individual in the immediate past. There is undoubtedly one common psychobiological law explaining the activities of the brain cells, how they act on a common stimulus producing a sensation, what is involved in perception, in an appreciation, what in recollection, what in memory, what in reasoning, what in volition, what in desiring, and in emotions. How are the cells related? What cell activities are primary and what are secondary? Which cells are exciting and which inhibitory? These are questions that must be answered before normal psychic action can be comprehended. Then we shall be in a fair way to readily comprehend how we get all degrees of disturbance of these normal relations, leading down to the deepest insanity. We shall then see why there is such a marked similarity among the different sorts of abnormal manifestations, such as the hallucinations of insanity, the delusions of hypnotism, the experiences of the dreamer, the fancies of revelry, and still other facts in anthropology. Although the ultimate solution of these problems depends on advances in the science of cell physiology, we need also to know all that other methods of study will yield. We must know gross anatomy before histology. I took up the study of dreams as a convenient portal to the general subject of hallucinations, and with the hope of adding to our knowledge of this most fascinating field of psychology. In the month of November 1884, I began recording my dreams. and have accumulated the records of over 1,000 dreams per year since that date. 2/3 of these are more or less elaborately detailed, so that we have here a great quantity of matter which will require much time to properly and thoroughly study. The present article is only a preliminary report due to a general survey of the data, and serving to introduce more detailed studies to follow later. It is to be hoped it may also stimulate others to study their own dreams at least, for only by comparison are we able to generalize and to discover what is idiosyncratic in these manifestations. In many ways it helps a student to become thoroughly familiar with the work and theories of others in the special line he proposes to follow, to serve as a guide and to prevent the waste of misdirected efforts. In this study, however, it is best to read sparingly until considerable headway has been made in one's own method. The reason being that much of the literature in this line is more of a poetical than of a scientific nature, and that a tendency to view one's own stats with the special bias is readily and unavoidably given. There is a tendency to be interested in the matter of the dreams, in its aesthetic effects, much as we react towards ideas and events in real life in relation to our well-being. Of course, this is the unscientific standpoint. The fact that a person dreams much or little is of more significance than what one dreams. A curve representing the variations from day to day in the amount of dreaming has scientific interest, while the hobgoblins that we saw are of interest to children. The introspective method has 2 stages. At first, we simply observe the phenomena presented by nature in their serial and concurrent relations, and from the light thus afforded, we are enabled to experiment or to control certain conditions with advantage and intelligence. So far, I have confined myself to the first of these methods. There are a few pertinent biographical details that should accompany each student's memoir. I may be said to possess the dreamy diathesis in a strong degree, manifested from early childhood to the present time, a period of 30 years. My mental make-up is inherited mostly from the paternal side, and is erethic in quality. The nutritive function has been derived from the maternal side, and present an irritable digestive system. My father rarely dreams, but my mother has many dreams in which she takes great interest. My memory is strong only in its visualizing power. As a child I was subject to cramps, costiveness, and nightmares. The interrelation of these facts is evident. In regard to health, I have improved steadily with age. Dreams that occurred before my 5th year of life are quite as vivid in my memory as a few waking scenes of that period which I can recall. In the period lying between my 8th and 12th years, my dreams were particularly troubled. But at present, my recollection of them is vague. On retiring, I reviewed the events of the day over and over again, introducing variations and often new chapters with the slightest effort. Yet had I undertaken to write a novel, I should have failed. Often before my eyes there appeared mosaics of colours, expanding and contracting or rotating, and this especially if my eyes were shut. At times I could see malign faces appear on the walls with great reality and distinctness. If no nightmare caused me to awake during the night, the dream, however pleasant, always took a disagreeable and frightening turn, waking in the morning. I felt myself lifted up as if gravity had temporarily reversed its action, and then I was dropped from a great height back to earth, which I neared in increasing fear and loss of breath. But I always awoke just before striking the ground, and when the fears seemed to be at a climax. Some mornings a pleasant dream would be substituted, and when the pleasures of anticipation of some rare treat were at climax, just as the treat was about to be enjoyed, I awoke. My mother taught me a remedy for bad dreams, which I applied, with immediate universal successes, viz., on composing myself asleep, the object of a dreaded dream was by voluntary act brought before my mind, and while held there I said mentally, "Shall I dream of that?" here visualizing the scene which past dreams had taught me to fear, and then the subject was dismissed with a confidence that I should not be troubled by that dream for that night. Should the feared scene again intrude into consciousness before sleep came, I must once more be dismissed by the formula, or my work were vain. Thus, one by one, I rehearsed the list of bugbears every night, making special effort not to treat pleasant subjects in like way, for then I knew they would not be dreamed about. By this means the mind passed from a state of fear, where the image haunts it, to one of confidence and control, where, by some automatic action, similar to that by virtue of which we can wake up at a set time, the mind retains control throughout sleep. I am subject to 3 distinct classes of dreams, which for convenience may be designated respectively. 1. Evening dreams. 2. Night dreams. 3. Morning dreams, as showing the time of the sleeping period when they most generally take place. Perhaps a 4th class could be added, viz. those excited by digestive derangements, such as nightmares, but they are rather modifications of the others due to extra exciting causes at work for a definite period during any portion of the night. The first 2 classes are rare dreams. The 3rd class makes up the main bulk of the dream record. Class 1. This takes place only when I can manage to get to bed, when very tired and very sleepy, without getting thoroughly awake in the effort to doff my clothes. I am then in a semi-somnambulistic condition, while still conscious of my surroundings. While in this state, I suddenly experience a nervous discharge which throws many of my muscles, sometimes including those of voice, into violent activity, as in a single twitch, so brief is the action. I have the sensation of passing out of a comatose state into the ordinary state, which is followed by tranquil sleep. Never has sleep proper followed such a state without the sudden discharge and feeling of psychic change. Dreams often accompany this state, whose tragic climax coincides with the discharge. Psychically, the discharge is felt as the effort of the body to escape the impending danger, not through voluntary, but through reflex action. Once after severe exercise of skating, I retired with the sensation of the movements and scenes of the day reverberating through my nerves. While still conscious of my room, I lay reviewing the scenes of the day as they whirled by with unwonted vividness, until suddenly they became real. I was dreaming. A hole in the ice developed, into which I fell with a shriek and a struggle that was real and no dream, much to the amusement of my bedfellow. Had this been an ordinary dream, I could have experienced the same series of psychic phenomena without the muscular movement. These dreams occurred immediately after retiring, have no real sleep connected with them, while ordinary dreams accompany waking from sleep of longer or shorter duration. A strange sense of reality may sometimes be present when the scene of the dream is laid in my bedroom and I am conscious of being in bed. Then awaking there is nothing to prove that it was a dream, except the peculiar circumstance which the dream introduced. Thus one evening, after composing myself for sleep, I saw a white figure approach my couch. Full of dread, I threw up my arm to ward off the spectre, and awakening, it immediately vanished. On learning that no one had entered the room, the sudden unreal way in which it vanished, and reflecting that I had been awake, I should not have been frightened, and not being a believer in ghosts, I concluded it must be a dream. Thus a process of ratiocination was required to properly characterize the phenomenon. Class 2. This class results from excessive stimulation of psychic or sensory organs, by which, to use a material figure, the molecules of the nervous substance are so set in vibration that they continue to vibrate during a large part of sleep. Such reverberations are felt during the waking period as well. The boy who has spent a glorious 4th of July retires with the booming of guns and the blaze of fireworks before his mind, and these images haunt his dreams in grotesque forms. The student, after hard work at his algebra, has similar experiences with X's, Y's, and Z's. Sleep is disturbed. The brain is too full of blood to allow perfect sleep. The real rest comes not for hours. Perhaps the mind works, even in a logical manner, to solve vexed questions, though this must be seldom. The dreams of Class 3, as we shall see, are very different things, but before taking up this class, a few words about the dreams which we may designate as Class 4. Violent palpitations of the heart and intense peristaltic writherings of the intestines accompany such dreams in many cases. Here I do not suppose the dream is to be considered secondary to the physical phenomenon, but rather that by nervous or psychic sympathy the physical organ is reacted upon by dreams, which it originally excited and determined the character of. Class 3 Morning Dreams. These occur when the brain has had a period of rest and repair. Perhaps we may speak of it as a period of bloodlessness, and now on waking, blood is rushing in, with a rapid rise of blood pressure in the brain. They differ also from other dreams in the faintness of their images, by virtue of which they are almost immediately erased from consciousness by external stimuli received on awakening. They differ also from the foregoing classes in the fact that they are new or varied combinations of past mental experiences, worked up with great fertility of fancy and multiplicity of transformation. Events of the day before, preferably scenes of 2 days ago, as if those of yesterday were not faint enough, which had been forgotten, so trivial were they, set in a background of scenes of my boyhood, the most trivial act of attention to an object one passes on the street, which would never again be thought of, is often the hero of a dream scene. No new sensations are introduced into these dreams, but just as soon as a new sensation is experienced in waking life, it is seized upon as material for these creations, which are, after all, only grotesque combinations, although exceedingly real in that they possess the detail and completeness of natural scenes. One may dream of riding on the cars who has never ridden on them, but his sensations will be simply those he imagined while awake, while thinking of the subject. Not until the person has ridden on the cars can he experience in dream the true sensation thereto belonging. This law holds in my case with every possible experience of life. On the transformation of dream scenes. In waking life, one may see a person in the distance approaching who may be judged in all confidence to be Mr. A. On his nearer approach, he is seen to be Mr. B. On this mental process, there is no surprise, neither is there in dreams where a person judged to be A is shortly seen as B. The same is true of objects, and in this case of transformation, one or more of the objects in a dream scene may change without a corresponding change of the others called for in nature. In this way, places and things and persons are never associated in our waking experience and brought into juxtaposition, thus making it difficult to properly relate the parts of a dream to one another on waking. A second method of transformation is by what I designate as realized fancy. In waking life, in viewing a scene or event, I fancy certain modifications or expect certain things that do not occur, and probably should not occur, except that the exuberance of fancy drags them in. In dreams I have similar fancies, but here I find them realized. If I picture to my imagination that I am at a certain distant place, it does not take long before I am actually experiencing passively what a moment ago I was actively presenting to my mind. This is a fertile source of transformation in dreams. These transformations it is that make it so difficult to remember dreams and to properly relate them, for at times it seems as if an event might have two antecedents in a dream, as if one had a double consciousness for a short time, and had been enacting a role on two different fields at once, which in some unaccountable way becomes one field and one person. Perhaps it is only a difficulty of the rational mind in trying to remember what took place in a mind in which reason was dormant. We are now prepared to discuss methods of record and of study of the record in connection with the results obtained by their application. One must accustom himself to holding the attention fixed upon the scene of the dream world after waking in the morning, and not allow the attention to be diverted for an instant to the scenes of the external world, or the superior strength of its impressions will instantly blot out the faint images of the dream. Then, by carefully reviewing the events of the dream, it may be more indelibly fixed on the memory. It is well, however, to have pencil and paper at hand, and jot down the dream, at least skeleton-wise, to aid in reconstructing it when the record is more carefully made. A single word in this way is sufficient to recall the dream by. Objects we meet in our daily walks, by a similar process, set us feeling that some experience has passed in our life in connection with them somehow, and when the experience is unravelled, it is found to be the fragment of a dream, which dream was either suggested by the object itself when it was scarcely noticed a day or two before, or if it had made a strong impression. That impression was made long ago, or else the object is similar in some way to the dream object, so as to suggest it. One has to have his own notebook with him all the time, for he knows not when an object may help him recall a dream. I find that the completeness with which a dream can be recalled, roughly speaking, depends inversely on the time which has elapsed between its occurrence and its first recollection. But a similar law governs all subsequent recollections. Thus, if a dream be carefully rehearsed to fix it on the mind before rising, and a word or skeleton suggestive be made, should a portion of the day's activities intervene before the dream is recorded, the suggestive will aid in restoring much less of the details than if the scenes are fresher. The dream itself has all the completeness of nature, and if immediately observed by the active attention can be studied as a landscape, is, except in the case of dreams, one is allowed only a momentary peep at the scenery, and then has to restore as much as he can recall. The dream records I have made are therefore very meagre compared with the real dreams. The relation is exactly similar to that existing between a landscape itself and the description of a landscape by a passing tourist. But I find the impression of a natural scene, however short, is stronger than that made by these exceedingly faint images. When I first began recording, the mind seemed so full of the subject that I would wake up during the night just to dream and to record dreams. So I had to put a sliding frame with a slit in it over my tablet to guide the pencil while writing, or else the lines would be superimposed in an undecipherable manner. But this extreme zeal caused nervous prostration. It is a really exhausting process to keep the attention held on faint impressions in the presence of strong ones, and the effort to record the faint details is also exhausting, so that I was compelled to adopt a more careless attitude of mind towards the record, but I think the laws we shall subsequently reveal have not been thereby affected. When the attention is turned to a dream scene passing in the mind, on awakening it can recall certain antecedent events that join onto the ones present, and so on back into the night. Though of course we must not let the time relations presented by the dream be any guide here, for one can dream of a year in a minute, or take part in events lasting hours in a moment. The dream sketches back and grows fainter and fainter until no more can be recalled. This seems to harmonize with the view that our morning dreams take place only during the passing from sleep to wakefulness, or while the blood pressure in the brain rises from a lower to a higher level. Now, when the mind travels backward over a dream in the way last indicated, beginning with the dream scene present when, just awakening, it goes backwards by jumps. That is, the dream has a monolith form or segmented character. It is a chain composed of links of more vivid scenes connected by scenes less vivid. The links only are recalled in the inverse order. The events inside each link are seen in their true progressive relations. When from any reason the scenes are less vivid, as from having allowed the outside world to intrude upon the attention, the fainter parts drop out, and these parts usually correspond to those details by which some principal object, person, or event of one link becomes by transformation the nodal or focal point of the succeeding link. In such a case, the two links seem distinct and are recorded as distinct dreams, though the mind has a vague sense that they are only fragments of longer dreams without at the same time connecting them. Several links may be bound together into larger links. This appears to be due to the mental relations of the events themselves, but it's occurred to me that there might be a physiological explanation of this moniliform character, so that the blood pressure varies with the pulse and respiratory movements, and as the waking period occupies a few of the larger and many more of the shorter waves, we here have something quite corresponding. If the dreams are vivid or if memory is good, then we have one long dream composed of many transformations. If the dream is less vivid, we get a few fairly long dreams, although some of these may be short and consist of but one node. Then if the dream has been very faint, we get only a few scattered nodes of events, persons or places about which we dreamed, but we cannot recall details. We can also secure all these conditions by recording successive days in bed, or after rising, or after breakfast, or after dinner, or after supper, and if we wait until bedtime, we can be glad if we are able to recall a single particle of dream. But suppose we make a practice of recording the dream, say just on awakening, then we shall find that some mornings we have the greatest degree of vividness and unity, and on others the least degree, and, with all intermediate stages represented by different mornings. It therefore follows that the number of dreams a person can recall has no direct significance, but only the total amount dreamed. Guided by this law, I proceeded to count the total number of words in the dream record of each day, and to plot the curve for the whole time, and the results obtained we now proceed to discuss. Some dreams are so vague that nothing of detail can be made out, but only that I dreamed about such or such thing, or that I recall a single object out of a single scene. This object I have designated the node or focal point of greatest vividness. This node is the last to fade out, and the dream scene was vivid enough it is by means of this node that the memory restores the ancillary details. I divided the dreams into two classes, viz., those consisting of a single bare nucleus, and those more complexly organized. In a table at the close of this paper, I have grouped the daily records according to length from 1 to 900, which was the longest record for one day. Opposite each group I have placed the number of days that presented records of that length, and in the third and fourth columns the corresponding number of dreams, complex and symbol, in 2 additional columns the average daily number of dreams, and finally the average length of the dreams. A little inspection shows us that the simple dreams tend to remain stationary, or to decrease in number as the record lengthens. The complex dreams, while increasing in number, do so at a rate of increment 100 times smaller, while the average length of dreams increases 5 times as rapidly as their number. As a unit of measurement is diverse in these cases, this relation simply means that the average length of all dreams is 100 words. These facts are in perfect accordance with the theory. It is total amount and not the number of dreams dreamed that measures the physiological action. We have already seen how easily the length of the record for any day may be affected if the attention is called off, if one oversleeps so as to be hurried, and various other things occur to curtail the record. The 2 chief causes of disturbance are pressure of work and unusual experiences or occupation, excitement, etc. Like a journey, for instance. I was able to pick out of my record 30 consecutive months which were fairly uniform in my experience, the greater disturbing sources not having acted many days at a time during this period. The first 2 weeks of my record show a steady rise in the curve, which is in accordance with a law that attending to one's dreams increases their number, i.e., increases the number we become aware of having. But this law ceased to operate after the climax was reached. The curve was seen to be very irregular, with a mixture of short and long words without apparent law. Still, one could discern a crowding together of the long records at certain points. A parallel curve for the moon's phase shows that the 2 curves were independent. I then chose the physiological or sexual month of 28 days and found there the period I sought. I thought that 30 months, when summated, would be sufficient to equate the petty distributing influences, and thus I could get a curve approximately showing the actual state of affairs. The table at the close of this paper shows the numbers from which the curve has been constructed. The nature of this curve and the fact that it was plotted for a menstrual period requires that we compare it with a curve representing the sexual condition. In the human female, we have presented the monthly phenomenon of the catamenia lasting nearly a week. This phenomenon has relation to the functions of reproduction, although the phenomenon is still not thoroughly understood. We have data which show that during this period, 1 or more Graafian follicles burst and set free ripe ova, which are pressed down the fallopian tubes, and if fertilized, remain to be developed in the uterus. This cause of the bursting of the follicle is due to a congested condition of the ovaries, or a heightened blood pressure in them, and accessory structures which may account for the uterine hemorrhage. But coitus may probably accomplish the same effect and thus prevent an impending menstrual flow. At any rate, after the flow has ceased, an ovum is present in the tubes or uterus, most favourably placed as regards fertilizability, and it is well known that the female is most erotic and irritable at this time. The physical cycle is accompanied by marked physical characteristics that gradually increase up to the period, and after temporary decadence during the flow, present a sharp climax a week later. We shall term the first climax the minor climax, and the second the major climax. It is readily seen why the erotic state should be at its climax when the ovum is ready for fertilization. We have no direct means of measuring this condition as a curve, but we can do so indirectly. The first curve of the plate marked day is taken from Hermann's Handbuch der Physiologie, BD 6, Part 2, page 74, and represents the frequency of conception with time relation to the menstrual period. The 2 climaxes above noted are well known, though the curve was plotted only with reference to a preceding menstrual period and not with reference to a subsequent one. As the periods of women differ in length, the minor climax does not come out in its true sharpness and height. Undoubtedly, there are other ways probably superior to this one of measuring the physiological period indirectly, but I am not aware that any available data have been gathered with reference to this point. It would only seem natural that the male should also show a sexual period corresponding to that in the female, and that in well-matched couples the climaxes would coincide. Concerning this point, we read in Foster's Physiology, page 691, 4th English edition, 1883, within the year an approximately monthly period is manifested in the female by menstruation, although there is no exact evidence of even a latent similar cycle in the male. On the other hand, in Dr. Hammond's Treatise on Insanity, published the same year, page 114, we read, Gall contended that there was a periodical manifestation in men analogous to that existing in females, and Levy holds a similar opinion. The latter states that young and robust persons do not notice this tendency unless their attention is specially directed to it, but men feebly constituted or endowed with a great degree of irritability, or who have reached the period of their decline, perceive the alteration which their health monthly undergoes. The feeling of discomfort is general and inexpressible, and the mind participates in it, for it is more difficult to maintain a train of ideas, a tendency to melancholy, or perhaps an unusual degree of irascibility is joining to the indolence of the intellectual faculties. These modifications persist some days and disappear of themselves. I have certainly noticed in some of my friends this tendency to some monthly periodical abnormal manifestation. I think this is much more common than is ordinarily supposed, and that careful examination or inquiry will generally, if not invariably, establish the existence of a periodicity of the character referred to. In my experience, young and robust persons are subject to recurrent periods of wakefulness at night, which, when they coincide with a full moon, are attributed to the action of its light. Undoubtedly, the light of the moon has an independent action of this sort, but if Mantegazza's theory is correct, that the sexual period became established with relation to the lunar period because moonlight nights were favourable to courting, there is a strong association existing between the moon's light and the excitation of the psychic sexual functions. However, the period long ago became so firmly established as to run independently of the phases of the moon, and even to vary from its length so as to have a precessive relation to the moon's phases. The influence of that old institution, the Sabbath, must have had a powerful effect in fixing the period at 28 days, but this period is easily influenced by exciting or nerve-depressing causes, the former shortening the interval and the latter delaying the period, or even preventing it to a great extent. In the male, as in the female, the maturation of the reproductive elements is a continuous process, though we may hardly say that it is not influenced by this menstrual periodicity. It certainly is influenced by many incidental forces such as food, temperature, exercise, occupation, sexual excitement, etc. But here, as in physics, we ought, I think, to consider each force still acting and producing its proper effects, though the resultant may fail to reveal the direct action of any one element at a particular time. The menstrual period is a steady force. The others are accidental and variable in time. Hence, if we take a sufficiently long period and summate by months, the disturbing forces will largely equate their effects, whereas the menstrual force will thus reveal its true action. The presence of the reproductive elements exerts a constant stimulus upon the brain cells, which cause them to generate characteristic dreams that in turn react to produce expulsion of the gametal cells. This gynekbole will be more frequent at periods when the psychic cells are most irritable, and therefore furnishes data for plotting the sexual curve in the case of the male, and the result is shown in curve B of the plate. As in the previous curve, it is only an indirect measure of the physiological rhythm we are considering. Here also we get two prominent cusps in the curve, in the form of a minor and a major climax, 1 week apart, and thus exactly corresponding to the climax in the case of the curve A of the female. The figures on which this curve is based are given in the table. A similar treatment of the dream values gives us curve C. Here the two climaxes appear again in their corresponding positions, but approximately equal in value. In the sexual curve the climaxes fall on Tuesdays, while in the dream curve they occur on Wednesday, a day later. The curve keeps near its average level between the climatic points. It sinks below the average during the 2 weeks succeeding the menstrual week, and as we approach this period it rises again, becoming in the case of the dream curve a marked climax during the week preceding the period. There is a curious descent in the curves, most marked in the case of curve C, on Monday mornings. This must be due either to the influence of Sunday, or else to the fact that the mind is somewhat anxious as it is about to resume the cares of a new week, which anxiety acts probably as a constant factor in disturbing the completeness of the dream recollection. It is an open question whether a rise in the dream curve represents increased power of recollection, or increased vividness of dreaming, or increased irritability, or all these together. We are inclined to believe that the menstrual period is at bottom a rhythm of the vital or psychic nature and influences probably all the activities of mind and body. Hence these activities, when properly observed and measured, become indices of the more fundamental rhythm, which they thus indirectly measure, or at least reveal. In the case of the knee-jerk reported in the first number of this journal, it was shown how exceedingly sensitive it was in its responses, indicating diverse external and internal conditions and changes. It appears probable that, had the experiments been conducted over a sufficiently long interval, they would have revealed a monthly rhythm. We also suspect that a great many psychopsychic reactions are modified by this rhythm, and the extent to which they are thus subject ought to be determined before we can rightly interpret the results. Another question which occurs here is this: what sort of a rhythm is a menstrual period? There is no fact in nature more prominent than the occurrence of periodicity, and these periods are of almost infinitely varied lengths and variously and complexly compounded. Many periods are secondary and resultant, being dependent on others. In physiology, nearly all the periods are in relation to cosmic rhythms, to which they are related, not as physical resultants, but as vital or intelligent responses. The occurrence of the one is a sign to the protoplasm to act out the other. Yet we have hinted above that the living being may anticipate the stimulus and react at the proper time, in the absence of the stimulus, and thus have an independent rhythm of its own. How this is done is one of the mysteries of biology yet to be solved. We consider this sexual rhythm as belonging to this category. When we analyze the figures that enter into the value of the dream curve, we find that several components are active in producing the result. Thus, the occurrence of the ekbols themselves has a modifying influence on the dream value, tending to raise it. But even when all the dream values coinciding with days of ekbol are thrown out and the remaining days summated, the character of the curve is not seriously altered, though of course reduced in value. Let us call the curve thus stripped of its overtones, so to speak, the fundamental. Then I found that an ekbol occurring at or near a minimal point had the power to raise the fundamental by half of its value. But on a maximal point, the increment became 1/5 of the fundamental value. The average power of the increment, for all the mixed cases being 1/4 of the fundamental. The ratio of minimal cases to maximum cases, an equal number of each, is 1 to 1.11 in the compound curve, 1 to 1.41 in the fundamental, and 1 to 1.33 in the mixed or normal curve. Although the relative value of the increment is less in the case of the maximum point than in that of the minimal point, the absolute value is about twice as great in the latter as in the former case. This is in accordance with what we should expect. The ekbol causes increased flow of blood to the brain, on the presence of which the dream value so largely depends. This increased flow is relatively more marked when the brain has less blood in it at minimal points than when it has a larger quantity of blood at the maximal points. When, therefore, an ekbol occurs, the dream value is raised by the ratio 1.25 as an average, and then it falls again to its normal value. But when only 1 day intervenes before the next ekbol, the fall is not so great, the ratio being here 1.10 to 1. The effect of an ekbol to raise the dream value is not so great when it is closely preceded by another ekbol, but in 33 cases presented by our data, the ratio of the first to the second wave was 4,903 to 6,168, or 1 to 1.25. We shall proceed to show that this ratio, which seems to contradict the last statement, is due to the influence of the fundamental curve. When we analyze the cases more carefully, we find that some of them contradict the result we obtained by addition. When these contradictory results are compared with the state of the fundamental curve, we find that in most cases the result has been due to the effect of this curve overcoming the effect properly due to the ekbol. Thus, when we know that an ekbol raises the dream value, but we meet a case where a day free from ekbol just preceding or succeeding has a higher dream value, we find an explanation for such a phenomenon when we see that such day is nearer a maximum point than the ekbol day. This law is perfectly plain when we assume that each of the forces acts to contribute its effect independently of the others. The effect of an ascending curve raises all the values, and a descending one depressing them is rarely seen in the tables. Now, therefore, analyzing the above ratio in this way, we have the table is displayed on the page, comparing the first day greater than the second and the second day greater than first to the number of cases and the ratio. The fact that so many cases show that the first day is the greater, even when the influence of the curve is unfavourable, leads us to announce the laws above, even though the ratio obtained by summation of all the cases is the reverse. but this ratio is a compounded one, and we wish to eliminate the effect of the fundamental. Were we dealing with the physical facts accurately determined, we should expect that the ratio 1.4 to 1 in the 6 cases where the first day is greater than the second, in accordance with the inferred law, when the fundamental assists this result, should be greater than that of 1.92 to 1 when the curve is contrary. This illustrates the peculiarity of physiological data. The element of disturbing influences is so great that experimental cases are always occurring, especially when the number of cases is small, as in this instance. For this reason, though we treat the numbers while performing computations as if they were accurate, we have no right to regard the results as accurate. They may be very inaccurate and even contrary to the truth, but by taking a large number of cases, we are justified in regarding the results as indicators. Thus, no significance can be attached to the peculiar form of our curves, but they simply indicate that here is a heaping up, as it were, of some influence at the occurrence of the menstrual interval. We shall require an infinite number of cases to eliminate disturbances and make our figures have mathematical significance. This point deserves to be kept in mind while dealing with such a problem as this. We saw above that the length of dreams increases nearly as fast as the increment in the daily record. That is, an average of 100 words must be added to the record to give an additional dream. We have also seen that the occurrence of a neck bowl raised the dream value by the ratio of 1.25 as compared with the day preceding or succeeding. When the number of dreams are compared for this case, it is found that there is no difference in the number of simple dreams, but that the complex dreams are increased in number more rapidly than the record. Thus 164 cases of neck bowl against their succeeding days gave an average ratio of 2.9 to 1.9. This signifies that the continuity of dreaming is by this influence broken. The fact, I think, is readily accounted for by the process of awakening that often accompanies the ekbol. We have now to consider the annual variations. Each year contains 13 physiological months. Out of the 30 months from which I plotted the monthly curve, I chose 26 consecutive months for plotting the annual curve. I found that, as our table shows, there was a minimal period at March-April and a maximal point at November-December. The 2 years are closely similar in these respects. The dream value being the summation of 28 days is to be relied on for a curve, but the ekbols are too few, of course, to give a corresponding gonekbolic curve. We can really perceive this on inspecting the number and seeing how 1 year contradicts the other. So we shall leave the ekbols out of consideration and seek to get at the sexual variations in a different direction. The 2 years combined give us curve D of the plate. It is quite plain that the region of the winter solstice, rather more before than after it, the curve is maximal. It is also plain that the curve is minimal at the time of the equinoxes, the fall being in our curve greatest at the spring equinox. There is a slight rise at the approach of the summer solstice, but when we compare the curves E and F in these respects, our dream curve seems sadly deficient. It is quite probable that this deficiency is due to the fact that about this time the change of life from the routine of study to the recreations of vacation acts detrimentally to the dream record. Indeed, I know by experience that I was not so faithful in my records at this period as at other times. In the animal and plant world, the periods marked by the approach of the 2 solstices are marked by reproductive activities. This has relation to climate, of course, and not to the astronomical facts directly. The winter is provided against by well-protected winter eggs and seeds, and in the case of mammals, the gestation period has place during the winter that the young may be born at such a time as to have the advantages of summer. The direct effect of food and temperature in early summer is, of course, to nourish the reproductive systems, and where the young can be quickly matured, reproductive activities are quickly instituted. Psychically, the human male feels the approach of summer as a spring fever, which is probably of sexual significance. To some extent, Dussing has worked at this problem and shown that the frequency of conceptions in the human being varies during the year, having maximal points at or near the solstices, but he finds a major climax at the summer solstice, and attributes the other rise in the curve at the winter solstice to the influence of the Yule festivities. Our curve E is taken from page 98 of his work, and represents the conceptions in Sweden submitted for 1851 to 1855. Dussing also shows us the interesting fact that as the births increase, the increment acts unequally on the production of the two sexes, the girl births suffering more variations than the boy births. Our curve F has been plotted from data furnished on pages 298 to 300 of his work. The ratio of boys to girls is given, and this ratio falls as conceptions increase in frequency. We have plotted the variations from the average ratio and have moreover transported the plus into negative, so as to make the curve parallel with our other curves. It therefore shows variability in the girl births directly and the boy births indirectly. There is of course no reason why, of two variables, one shall be rather chosen as a constant than the other. The dotted line represents the average ratio. Ordinates above the line represent a fall in boys as compared with the girl births. Now what seems plain on comparing all these curves is this, that in the monthly period the variation in the dream curve is parallel to that of the sexual curve, that in the annual curve the dream curve is parallel to the curve showing increased sexual activity, and is again to that showing the regulation of the sexual ratio. It follows then that we should expect that were a curve constructed showing the variations of the sexual ratio as related to the menstrual period, we would discover an important relation existing between the menstrual rhythm and the production of sex. It seems to me the matter is well worth investigating. It has been supposed that the relative ages of the reproductive products and the relative state of heat in the sexes influence the sexual ratio, but this seems likely to be complicated by the influence of the sexual rhythm. The months immediately succeeding the time for which we have summated our data were distributed by a trip to the tropics. In this case, the approach to the summer solstice was aided by the action of the system of an unusual climate, the result being to vastly increase the record in the region corresponding to Dusing's major climax. This fact taken in connection with what we stated above tends to show that our annual dream curve is too low for the month of May. A table is displayed on the page, table showing the ratio of increment in the daily number of dreams and their average length compared with the increase in the daily record. Table showing the ratio of the dream value on Erkpol days to dream value on days preceding, succeeding, and analyzed with reference to the state of the fundamental. A table is displayed on the page showing the variation of the power of recollecting dreams, perhaps of dream activity or vividness, as measured by the number of words in the dream record, summated for a period of 30 physiological months, from November 24, 1884 to March 13, 1887. The variation in the sexual rhythm as indicated by the number of gonekpols is also shown. End of A Study of Dreams by Julius Nelson, recorded by Leon Harvey for LibriVox.org.
Introduction to a Treatise on the Incubus by John Augustine Waller. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Public Domain Scholar. Introduction to a Treatise on the Incubus, or Night-Mare, Disturbed Sleep, Terrific Dreams, and Nocturnal Visions, with the means of removing these distressing complaints. The enjoyment of comfortable and undisturbed sleep is certainly to be ranked amongst the greatest blessings which heaven has bestowed on mankind, and it may be considered as one of the best criterions of a person enjoying perfect health. On the contrary, any disturbance which occurs in the enjoyment of this invaluable blessing may be considered a decisive proof of some derangement existing in the animal economy, and a consequent deviation from the standard of health. Indeed, it is astonishing how slight a deviation from that standard may be perceived by paying attention to the circumstance of our sleep and dreams. This may be more clearly demonstrated by attending carefully to the state of persons on the approach of any epidemic fever or other epidemic disease, and indeed of every kind of fever, as I have repeatedly witnessed. When no other signs of a deviation from health could be perceived, the patient has complained of disturbed rest and frightful dreams, with nightmare, etc. Hence the dread which the vulgar in all ages and countries have had of what they call bad dreams, experience having proved to them that persons, previously to being attacked with some serious or fatal malady, have been visited with these kind of dreams. For this reason, they always dread some impending calamity, either to themselves or others, whenever they occur. and, so far as relates to themselves, often not without reason. Frightful dreams, however, though frequently the forerunners of dangerous and fatal diseases, will yet often occur when the disturbance of the system is comparatively trifling, as they will generally be found to accompany every derangement of the digestive organs, particularly of the stomach, of the superior portion of the intestinal canal, and of the biliary system. Children whose digestive organs are peculiarly liable to derangement are also very frequently the subjects of frightful dreams, and partial nightmares, which are frequently distressing enough to them. They are still more so to grown-up people, as they generally arise from a more serious derangement of the system. Those who are subject to them will agree with me in opinion that they are by no means to be ranked amongst the lesser calamities to which our nature is liable. There are many persons in the world to whom it is no uncommon occurrence to rise from their bed in the morning more wearied and exhausted, both in mind and body, than when they retired to it the evening before, to whom sleep is frequently an object of terror rather than comfort, and who seek in vain for relief from the means usually recommended by physicians. To such persons I dedicate this little work. For their information I have laid down, in as clear terms as the subject will admit, the history of those diseases which, by depriving us of the benefit of sleep and driving rest from our couch, often render life itself miserable, and lay the foundation of formidable and sometimes of fatal diseases. Amongst those affections which thus break in upon our repose, the most formidable and the most frequent is the disease called Night-Mare, the history of which, with its various modifications, I have endeavored to give with as much accuracy as possible, and have attempted also to investigate its nature and immediate causes, as well as to point out the best mode of obtaining relief. Very little assistance could be obtained in this undertaking from the writings of modern physicians, who have paid little or no attention to it. Those of the 16th and 17th centuries seem to have well understood both its causes and cure, but differed much amongst themselves respecting its nature, as will ever be the case when we attempt to reason on any subject which is above our comprehension. I have availed myself of all the light which these illustrious men could throw upon the subject, which is not a little, but my principal information respecting it has arisen from a personal acquaintance with the disease itself, for a long series of years having been a victim to it from my earliest infancy. I have never met with any person who has suffered to so great an extent from this affection, or to whom it was become so habitual. To eradicate thoroughly a disease so deeply rooted and of so long duration cannot be expected, but I have so far succeeded as to bring it under great control, and to keep myself free from its attacks for several months together, or indeed scarcely ever to be disturbed by it at all. But when I have deviated from those rules which experience has proved to be sufficient to secure me from all danger of it. The various kinds of disturbed sleep taken notice of in this little work are all so many modifications of Night-Mare, and may be all remedied by observing the rules here laid down, as they will be found to originate from one or other of the causes here specified. The regimen and treatment I have recommended are directed to the root of the disease, that is, to the hypochondriac or hysterical temperament. For Night-Mare, disturbed sleep, terrific dreams, etc., may be considered only as symptoms of great nervous derangement, or hypochondriasis, and are a sure sign that this disease exists to a great extent. Thus, while the patient is seeking, by the means recommended, to get rid of his Night-Mare, he will find his general health improving, and the digestive organs recovering their proper tone. End of Introduction to a Treatise on the Incubus by John Augustine Waller.
To Find the Day of the Week for Any Given Date by Lewis Carroll. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Availle in October 2023. To Find the Day of the Week for Any Given Date by Lewis Carroll. Having hit upon the following method of mentally computing the day of the week for any given date, I send it you in the hope that it may interest some of your readers. I am not a rapid computer myself, and as I find my average time of doing any such question is about 20 seconds, I have little doubt that a rapid computer would not need 15. Take the given date in 4 portions, that is, the number of centuries, the number of years over, the month, the day of the month. Compute the following 4 items, adding each when found to the total of the previous items. When an item or total exceeds 7, divide by 7 and keep the remainder only. The century item. For Old Style, which ended September 2nd, 1752, subtract from 18. For New Style, which began September 14, divide by 4, take overplus from 3, multiply remainder by 2. The year item. Add together the number of dozens, the overplus, and the number of 4s in the overplus. The month item. If it begins or ends with a vowel, subtract the number denoting its place in the year from 10. This, plus its number of days, gives the item for the following month. The item for January is 0, for February or March, the 3rd month, 3, for December, the 12th month, 12. The day item is the day of the month. The total thus reached must be corrected by deducting 1, first adding 7 if the total be 0, if the date be January or February in a leap year, remembering that every year divisible by 4 is a leap year, excepting only the century years in New Style when the number of centuries is not so divisible, for example 1800. The final result gives the day of the week, 0 meaning Sunday, 1 Monday, and so on. Examples. 1783, September 18. 17 divided by 4 leaves 1 over. 1 from 3 gives 2, twice 2 is 4. 83 is 6 dozen and 11, giving 17, plus 2 gives 19, that is, dividing by 7, 5. Total 9, that is, 2. The item for August is 8 from 10, that is 2. So for September it is 2 plus 3, that is 5. Total 7, that is 0, which goes out. 18 gives 4. Answer, Thursday. 1676, February 23. 16 from 18 gives 2. 76 is 6 dozen and 4, giving 10, plus 1 gives 11, that is 4. Total 6. The item for February is 3. Total 9, that is 2. 23 gives 2. Total 4. Correction for leap year gives 3. Answer, Wednesday. End of To Find the Day of the Week for Any Given Date by Lewis Carroll. From Scientific American Supplement, No. 598, June 18, 1887.
Truthfulness by Charles Dudley Warner. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Truthfulness is as essential in literature as it is in conduct, in fiction as it is in a report of an actual occurrence. Falsehood vitiates a poem, a painting, exactly as it does a life. Truthfulness is a quality like simplicity. Simplicity in literature is mainly a matter of clear vision and lucid expression, however complex the subject matter may be. Exactly as in life, simplicity does not so much depend upon external conditions as upon the spirit in which one lives. It may be more difficult to maintain simplicity of living with a great fortune than in poverty, but simplicity of spirit, that is, superiority of soul to circumstance, is possible in any condition. Unfortunately, the common expression that a certain person has wealth is not so true as it will be to say that wealth has him. The life of one with great possessions and corresponding responsibilities may be full of complexity. The subject of literary art may be exceedingly complex, but we do not set complexity over against simplicity, for simplicity is a quality essential to true life as it is to literature of the first class. It is opposed to parade, to artificiality, to obscurity. The quality of truthfulness is not so easily defined. It also is a matter of spirit and intuition. We have no difficulty in applying the rules of common morality to certain functions of writers for the public. For instance, the duties of the newspaper reporter, or the newspaper correspondent, or the narrator of any event in life, the relation of which owes its value to its being absolutely true. The same may be said of hoaxes, literary or scientific. However clear they may be, the person indulging in them not only discredits his office in the eyes of the public, but he injures his own moral fiber, and he contracts such a habit of unveracity that he never can hope for genuine literary success. For there never was yet any genuine success in letters without integrity. The clever hoax is no better than a trick of imitation, that is, conscious imitation of another, which has unveracity to oneself at the bottom of it. Burlesque is not the highest order of intellectual performance, but it is legitimate, and if clearly done, it may be both useful and amusing. But it is not to be confounded with forgery, that is, with a composition which the author attempts to pass off as the production of somebody else. The forgery may be amazingly smart and be even popular, and get the author, when he is discovered, notoriety. But it is pretty certain that with its ingrained lack of integrity, it will never accomplish any original work of value, and it will be always personally suspected. There is nothing so dangerous to a young writer as to begin with hoaxing, or to begin with the invention, either as a reporter or correspondent, of statements put forward as facts which are untrue. This sort of facility and smartness may get a writer employment, unfortunately for him and the public, but there is no satisfaction in it to one who desires an honorable career. It is easy to recall the names of brilliant men whose fine talents have been eaten away by this habit of unveracity. This habit is the greatest danger of the newspaper press of the United States. It is easy to define this sort of untruthfulness and to study the moral deterioration it works in personal character and in the quality of literary work. It was illustrated in the forgeries of the marvelous boy Chatterton. The talent he expended in deception might have made him an enviable reputation. The deception vitiated whatever good there was in his work. Fraud in literature is no better than fraud in archaeology. Chatterton deserves no more credit than Shapiro, who forged the mobile pottery with its inscriptions. The reporter who invents an incident or heightens the horror of a calamity by fictions is in the case of Shapiro. The habit of this sort of invention is certain to destroy the writer's quality, and if he attempts a legitimate work of the imagination, it will carry the same unveracity into that. The quality of truthfulness cannot be juggled with. Akin to this is the trick which has put under proper suspicion some very clever writers of our day and cost them all public confidence in whatever they do. The trick of posing for what they are not. We do not mean only that the reader does not believe their stories of personal adventure and regards them personally as frauds, but that this quality of deception vitiates all their work, as seen from a literary point of view. We mean that the writer who hoaxes the public by inventions which he publishes as fact, or in regard to his own personality, not only will lose the confidence of the public, but he will lose the power of doing genuine work, even in the field of fiction. Good work is always characterized by integrity. These illustrations help us to understand what is meant by literary integrity. For the deception in the case of the correspondent who invents news is of the same quality as the lack of sincerity in a poem or in a prose fiction. There is a moral and probably a mental defect in both. The story of Robinson Crusoe is a very good illustration of veracity in fiction. It is effective because it has the simple air of truth. It is an illusion that satisfies. It is possible. It is good heart. but it has no moral deception in it. In fact, looked at as literature, we can see that it is sincere and wholesome. What is this quality of truthfulness which we all recognize when it exists in fiction? There is much fiction, and some of it, for various reasons, that we like and find interesting, which is nevertheless insincere, if not artificial. We see that the writer has not been honest with himself or with us in his views of human life. There may be just as much lying in novels as anywhere else. The novelist who offers us what he declares to be a figment of his own brain may be just as untrue as the reporter who sets forth a figment of his own brain, which he declares to be a real occurrence. That is, just as much faithfulness to life is required of the novelist as of the reporter, and in a much higher degree. The novelist must not only tell the truth about life as he sees it, material and spiritual, but he must be faithful to his own conceptions. He fortunately has genius enough to create a character that is reality to himself and to others. He must be faithful to that character. He must have conscience about it and not misrepresent it any more than he would misrepresent the sayings and doings of a person in real life. Of course, if his own conception is not clear, it will be as unjust as in writing about a person in real life whose character is known only by rumor. The novelist may be mistaken about his own creations and in his views of life, but if he have truthfulness in himself, sincerity will show in his work. Truthfulness is a quality that needs to be as strongly insisted on in literature as simplicity. But when we carry the matter a step further, we see that there cannot be truthfulness about life without knowledge. The world is full of novels, and their number daily increases, written without any sense of responsibility and with very little experience, which are full of false views of human nature and of society. We can almost always tell in a fiction when the writer passes the boundary of his own experience and observation. He becomes unreal, which is another name for untruthful. And there is an absence of sincerity in such work. There seems to be a prevalent impression that anyone can write a story, but it scarcely need to be said that literature is in art, like painting and music, and that one may have knowledge of life and perfect sincerity, and yet be unable to produce a good, truthful piece of literature, or to compose a piece of music, or to paint a picture. Truthfulness is in no way opposed to invention or to the exercise of the imagination. When we say that the writer needs experience, we do not mean to intimate that his invention of character or plot should be literally limited to a person he has known or to an incident that has occurred, but that they should be true to his experience. The writer may create an ideally perfect character or an ideally bad character, and he may try him by a set of circumstances and events never before combined. And this creation may be so romantic as to go beyond the experience of any reader, that is to say, wholly imaginary, like a composed landscape which has no counterpart in any one view of a natural landscape. And yet it may be so consistent in itself, so true to an idea, or an aspiration, or a hope, that it will have the element of truthfulness and subserve a very high purpose. It may actually be truer to our sense of verity to life than an array of undeniable, naked facts set down without art and without imagination. The difficulty of telling the truth in literature is about as great as it is in real life. We know how nearly impossible it is for one person to convey to another a correct impression of a third person. He may describe the features, the manner, mention certain traits and sayings, all literally true, but absolutely misleading as to the total impression. And this is the reason why extreme, unrelieved realism is apt to give a false impression of persons and sins. One can hardly help having a whimsical notion occasionally, seeing the miscarriages even in our own attempts at truthfulness, that it absolutely exists only in the imagination. In a piece of fiction, especially romantic fiction, an author is absolutely free to be truthful, and it will be if he has personal and literary integrity. He moves freely amid his own creation and conceptions, and is not subject to the peril of the writer who admittedly uses facts, but uses them so clumsily or with so little conscience, so out of the real relations, as to convey a false impression and an untrue view of life. This quality of truthfulness is equally evident in The Three Guardsmen and in Midsummer Night's Dream. Dumas is as conscientious about his world of adventure as Shakespeare is in his semi-supernatural region. If Shakespeare did not respect the laws of his imaginary country and the creatures of his fancy, if Dumas were not true to the characters he conceived and the achievements possible to them, such works would fall into confusion. A recent story called The Refugees set out with a certain promise of veracity, although the reader understood, of course, that it was to be a purely romantic convention. But very soon the author recklessly violated his own conception, and when he got his real characters upon an iceberg, the fantastic position became ludicrous without being funny, and the performances of the same characters in the wilderness of the New World showed such a lack of knowledge in the writer that the story became an insult to the intelligence of the reader, whereas such a romance as that of the MS found in the Corpus Celinda, although it is humanly impossible and visibly a figment of the imagination, is satisfactory to the reader because the author is true to his conception, and it is interesting as a curious, allegorical, and humorous illustration of the ruinous character in human affairs of extreme unselfishness. There is the same sort of truthfulness in Austen's allegory of the celestial railway, in Froude's On a Siding at a Railway Station, and in Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. The habit of lying carried into fiction vitiates the best work, and perhaps it is easier to avoid it in pure romance than in the so-called novels of everyday life. And this is probably the reason why so many of the novels of real life are so much more offensively untruthful to us than the wildest romances. In the former, the author could perhaps prove every incident he narrates and produce living every character he has attempted to describe, but the effect is that of a lie, either because he is not a master of his heart or because he has no literary conscience. He is like an artist who is more anxious to produce a meretricious effect than he is to be true to himself or to nature. An author who creates a character assumes a great responsibility, and if he has not integrity or knowledge enough to respect his own creation, no one else will respect it, and worse than this, it will tell a falsehood to a host of undiscriminating readers. End of Truthfulness by Charles Dudley Warner. Read by Hassan.
Squirrels and Other Fur-Bearers by John Burroughs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. White-Footed Mouse. One day on my walk in the woods, I saw at one point the mice tracks, unusually thick around a small sugar maple. It was doubtless their granary. They had beech nuts stored there, I'll warrant. There were 2 entrances to the cavity of the tree, one at the base and one 7 or 8 feet up. At the upper one, which was only just of the size of a mouse, a squirrel had been trying to break in. He had cut and chiseled the solid wood to the depth of nearly an inch, and his chips strewed the snow all about. He knew what was in there, and the mice knew that he knew, hence their apparent consternation. They had rushed wildly about over the snow, and, I doubt not, had given the piratical red squirrel a piece of their minds. A few yards away the mice had a hole down into the snow, which perhaps led to some snug den under the ground. Hither they may have been slyly removing their stores while the squirrel was at work with his back turned. One more night, and he would effect an entrance. What a good joke upon him if he found the cavity empty! These native mice, I imagine, have to take many precautions to prevent their winter stores being plundered by the squirrels, who live, as it were, from hand to mouth. The wild mice are fond of bees and of honey, and they apparently like nothing better than to be allowed to take up their quarters in winter in some vacant space in a hive of bees. A chamber just over the bees seems to be preferred, as here they get the benefit of the warmth generated by the insects. One very cold winter, I wrapped up one of my hives with a shawl. Before long I noticed that the shawl was beginning to have a very torn and tattered appearance. On examination, I found that a native mouse had established itself in the top of the hive, and had levied a ruinous tax upon the shawl to make itself a nest. Never was a fabric more completely reduced into its original elements than were large sections of that shawl. It was a masterly piece of analysis. The work of the wheel and the loom was exactly reversed, and what was once shawl was now the finest and softest of wool. The white-footed mouse is much more common along the fences and in the woods than one would suspect. One winter day I set a mouse trap, the kind known as the delusion trap, beneath some ledges in the edge of the woods, to determine what species of mouse was most active at this season. The snow fell so deeply that I did not visit my trap for 2 or 3 weeks. When I did so, it was literally packed full of white-footed mice. There were 7 in all, and not room for another. Our woods are full of these little creatures, and they appear to have a happy social time of it, even in the severest winters. Their little tunnels under the snow and their hurried leaps upon its surface may be noted everywhere. They link tree and stump, or rock and tree, by their pretty trails. They evidently travel for adventure and to hear the news, as well as for food. They know that foxes and owls are about, and they keep pretty close to cover. When they cross an exposed place, they do it hurriedly. The field or meadow mice doubtless welcome the snow. They can now come out of their dens in the ground or beneath the flat stones and lead a more free and active life. The snow is their friend. It keeps off the cold, and it shields their movements from the eyes of their enemies, the owls, hawks, and foxes. Now they can venture abroad from their retreats without fear. They make little tunnels and roadways everywhere over the surface of the ground. They build winter houses under the great drifts. They found little mouse colonies in places where they have never been in summer. The conditions of life with them are entirely changed. They can get at the roots of the grasses, or the various herbs and seeds they feed upon, as well as in the snowless seasons, and without exposure to their enemies. I fancy they have great times there beneath the drifts. Maybe they have their picnics and holidays then, as we have ours in summer. When the drifts disappear in spring, you may often see where they have had their little encampments. A few square yards of the pasture or meadow bottom will look as if a map had been traced upon it, tunnels and highways running and winding in every direction and connecting the nests of dry grass, which might stand for the cities and towns on the map. These runways are smooth and round like pipes, and only a little larger than the bodies of the mice. I think it is only the meadow field mouse that lives in this way beneath the snow. I met one of these mice in my travels one day, under peculiar conditions. He was on his travels also, and we met in the middle of a mountain lake. I was casting my fly there, when I saw, just sketched or etched upon the glassy surface, a delicate V-shaped figure, the point of which reached about to the middle of the lake, while the 2 sides, as they diverged, faded out toward the shore. I saw the point of this V was being slowly pushed across the lake. I drew near in my boat, and beheld a little mouse swimming vigorously for the opposite shore. His little legs appeared like swiftly revolving wheels beneath him. As I came near, he dived under the water to escape me, but came up again like a cork, and just as quickly. It was laughable to see him repeatedly duck beneath the surface and pop back again in a twinkling. He could not keep under water more than a second or 2. Presently I reached him my oar, when he ran up it and into the palm of my hand, where he sat for some time and arranged his fur and warmed himself. He did not show the slightest fear. It was probably the first time he had ever shaken hands with a human being. He had doubtless lived all his life in the woods, and was strangely unsophisticated. How his little round eyes did shine, and how he sniffed me to find out if I was more dangerous than I appeared to his sight. After a while I put him down in the bottom of the boat, and resumed my fishing. but it was not long before he became very restless and evidently wanted to go about his business. He would climb up to the edge of the boat and peer down into the water. Finally, he could brook the delay no longer and plunged boldly overboard. But he had either changed his mind or lost his reckoning, for he started back in the direction from which he had come, and the last I saw of him he was a mere speck vanishing in the shadows near the shore. Later on I saw another mouse, while we were at work in the fields, that interested me also. This one was our native white-footed mouse. We disturbed the mother with her young in her nest, and she rushed out with her little ones clinging to her teats. A curious spectacle she presented as she rushed along, as if slit and torn into rags. Her pace was so hurried that 2 of the young could not keep their hold and were left in the weeds. We remained quiet, and presently the mother came back looking for them. When she had found one, she seized it as a cat seizes her kitten and made off with it. In a moment or 2 she came back and found the other one and carried it away. I was curious to see if the young would take hold of her teats again, as at first, and be dragged away in that manner, but they did not. It would be interesting to know if they seize hold of their mother by instinct when danger threatens, or if they simply retain the hold which they already have. I believe the flight of the family always takes place in this manner with this species of mouse. End of Squirrels and Other Fur-Bearers by John Burroughs.
Wyandotte Hens win egg-laying contest, 1917. An excerpt from The American Breeds of Poultry, Their Origin, History of Their Development, The Work of Constructive Breeders, and How to Mate Each of the Varieties for Best Results, by Frank L. Platt, 1921. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. While breeders, as a rule, are partial to the breed of their choice, and on every occasion champion that breed with pardonable enthusiasm, it usually is conceded by authorities who have a broad view of the entire field of breeds that the single-comb white leghorn, taking all the specimens of the race as you find them on the commercial egg farms of New York, New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, and Connecticut, is the more foolproof laying type and the somewhat more economical consumer of feed. However, when the American breeds are bred for egg production, that is, when an intelligent effort is made to regulate the type and tendencies of the progeny by carefully selecting the parent stock, hens and pullets of the American breeds may be depended upon to make a creditable showing in the egg-laying competitions. And it frequently does happen that a pen of these birds wins the championship prize. The records made by 4 breeds at the 6th egg-laying contest conducted at the Missouri Poultry Experiment Station, which covered a period of 1 year, November 1916 to November 1917, show the ability of highly egg-bred fowls of the American birds as layers alongside of the highly specialized leghorn. All Rhode Island Reds averaged 188 eggs each. All Wyandottes averaged 184 eggs each. All Leghorns averaged 178 eggs each. All Plymouth Rocks averaged 175 eggs each. The Silver Cup for highest production went to a pen of white Wyandottes owned by J.F. Jordan, Missouri. This pen of 5 females laid 216, 245, 269, 273, and 213 eggs, respectively, a total of 1,000, 226 eggs for the year, or an average egg production of 245 for each female in the pen, the highest average which had been made at the Missouri station up to that time. Footnote: These figures are taken from the official report of the station. However, if the egg yield of the 5 hens is added, it will be found that the total is 1,216 eggs instead of 1,226 as reported, and this error appears to be explicable only by the assumption that during the year 10 eggs were laid on the floor of the house and were not credited to any individual hen. End footnote. End of Wyandotte Hens Win Egg-Laying Contest, 1917. An excerpt from The American Breeds of Poultry, 1921, by Frank L. Platt. Read for LibriVox by Sue Anderson.